Nicole, Marmite, and I arrived in Camelot on our feet, but we didn't stay standing for long. It had been a while since I'd used hyperdimensional mathematics for anything more complex than subconscious speculation, let alone a manual slip, not since my return from Carcosa. The aftermath of the inhuman equation crackled and hissed across the surface of my mind, like water droplets flung on a red-hot metal plate. A stabbing headache blossomed behind my eyes and my stomach clenched like a fist. My body tried to reject the logic and lessons of the I doubled up so hard that Nicole's arm slid off my shoulders and I lost my tentacle grip around her waist. Marmite scurried to give us space, pulling his own bony tentacle free from around my thigh, moving with such haste that it bounced off my opposite shin. Nicole staggered and slumped to her knees on the grass, bundled in her long coat. I hugged myself with all my tentacles, drooling ropes of saliva, heaving with the effort of holding back a wave of vomit. But I refused to give up the contents of my stomach. A slip is just a slip, and I'd slipped so many times before. I croaked and gurgled and spluttered, but I wasn't sick. By the time I straightened up and wiped my mouth on the sleeve of my hoodie, Nicole was staring about us in slack-jawed wonder. "Welcome to Camelot," I croaked, then had to clear my throat again. "We are currently outside." Nicole wore an expression like a Paleolithic woman dumped on a London pavement, open-mouthed and wide-eyed at sights for which she had no context. I watched her take in the whirled purple sky and the soft yellow hillsides, the rough circle of Lazy's shining night spread out nearby, and the vast, humped bulk of the caterpillar, still standing where we'd left it only hours earlier. The off-white carapace bench lay where it had fallen beside the massive machine creature, and if my eyes did not deceive me, Jan's little polystyrene box of chicken lay on the bench. "TCH, littering," I said under my breath. A dried patch of crimson marked the nearby grass, where a little of Zheng's blood had soaked into the soil. Nicole looked up and found me with numb eyes, blinking up and down my body with growing confusion. She was not taking this well. Outside reality, that is," I added. "Not outside as in outdoors. Obviously. You can see that." I cleared my throat again. Nicole blinked very hard, as if trying to wake up from a bad dream. "It's perfectly safe, I promise." Bwop. Nicole and I both jumped at the sudden booming noise, a miniature version of the caterpillar's boop-whoop alarm, like the tiniest touch of engine plates on some vast machine, followed by the long, muffled dial-down whine from inside the pitted bulk of the giant. "It's just the caddy saying hi," I explained quickly, more than a little shaken myself. I turned and called out to all our extra-dimensional friends. "Hello, everyone. Sorry for the confusion. We're back again. Only for a moment though." Then I glanced at the caterpillar again, raising my voice across the yellow grass plains. "I don't suppose you can get a message to Lazy?" "No." The caterpillar did not reply. I took a deep breath, my stomach beginning to churn with anxiety. "We really must keep moving," I muttered to myself. "Get back to the house, get, sevens." "Right, yes. Camelot." Nicole finally spoke, then huffed a humorless laugh, her voice stretched thin. "That's just what we call it. It's a silly name, I know." "You have got to be joking," she said, still huddled on her knees beneath her long coat. She looked much more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her before, which was quite a feat, considering I'd seen her tied up and begging for her life. There was something pitiful and broken about her, out here. Strands of her blonde hair had escaped her bun, and she looked like she was in pain. That, or constipated. Knights in shining armor. "Where's the castle, huh? What next, we gonna recruit a gender-swapped King Arthur? Totally expect you lot to have something like that up your sleeves. At least that would make sense. We have a castle in a different dimension." "Sort of," I said with offhanded embarrassment, then I did a double takedown at Nicole. "Nikki. You're talking normally." "That I am." She puffed out a big sigh and a wince, rubbing her sternum with one hand. "Feel like total shit though, like I'm gonna hurl. Is it alright if I hurl out here, or is that gonna unravel my soul, or something equally stupid? Yes, be sick if you need to. I've done it plenty of times. I awkwardly reached for her with my tentacles. That's just what slipping feels like, I'm sorry. Better than a teleporter accident, I guess, she grumbled, but then she shied away from me, eyes going wide at my approaching tentacles. Hey. Sorry. I recoiled, mortified. I keep forgetting people can't see them normally, back in reality. Sorry. You've never seen this before. I'm sorry. It's just me. Don't worry. She waved a hand. I gather you saved me from getting some experimental brain surgery back there, so, hey, thanks. Don't worry about it. She nodded behind me. What's that though? That meant to be here too. Nicole was talking about Marmite, of course. The poor squid spider thing was taking to Camelot far worse than we apes. He was pressed low to the ground, his shadowy black membrane standing out like spilt ink on clean parchment, the purple light of Camelot reflecting from them like iridescent beetle wings. His legs were tucked in below his body and his segmented bone tentacles were wrapped in a ball around his core. Cone eyes swiveled and twitched in every direction. Marmite was a creature of dark corners and shadowy recesses, not wide open spaces and grassy steppe. Poor thing was cowering and exposed. Oh, Marmite. I'm sorry. I reached out and touched him with a tentacle. He reached up to meet me, locking the end of one bony appendage with mine. Nikki, I'm sorry, this is Marmite, he came with us just now but you couldn't see him. Right. Invisible monsters. I'll try not to think about that, thanks. I'm sorry, this is always so confusing. I sighed. Evie's right, we really need more than one pair of those magic glasses. Last thing my senses need right now is more bloody magic. Nikki, it'll be okay, I said, but I was really talking to myself, my own worry clawing up my throat, making my voice quiver. But we have to get back, as soon as possible. Ivy left everyone else's safety in the hands of Hingy, I huffed. The Brinkwood Church. Evie would kill me if she knew. Oh, wait. You were with Evie and Preem. What happened, were you in the room with them, what? Yeah, Nicole said with an exasperated sigh, giving me quite a look. Evelyn Say was doing I don't know. Some magic. Some bullshit with a notebook and sticking paper on the walls. Then I closed my eyes and she and the Preem, right? They were gone. You were out in the corridor. You know the rest, you were there for it. Okay. Okay, that explains absolutely nothing. I swallowed too hard, which made my throat hurt. Okay, Nikki, we've got to get back. I need us to slip again. Nicole raised both hands in surrender, wincing hard like she had a hangover headache. Heather Morell. Slow down. Please. I can't. Everyone is in danger. And you've got tentacles. Nicole laughed, right up on the edge of hysteria. Give me a moment here, okay? I've been babbling all day. I don't know how I got where I was, and now I don't know where I am. And that is an understatement. We should just go, I can do it. Yeah, Nicole's voice dripped with sarcasm. And when I go back, am I gonna be talking in riddles again? Gimme a sec to gather my thoughts. Your friends are scary enough, they can look after themselves for a couple of minutes, okay? Abyssal instinct pulled both ways at once. Get back to your pack, they need you, it screamed while at the same time it demanded whatever information I might glean from Nicole. One of my tentacles twitched with the urge to just peel her head open and extract what I needed directly, but that urge was so absurd it flickered out as soon as it crossed my mind. Okay, I forced myself to say, blowing out a deep breath. But we should get moving as soon as possible. Everyone else might need help. I did as she asked, though it was easier said than done. Nicole didn't weigh that much more than me, but my noodle arms were not up to the task, so I instinctively braced myself against the ground with half my tentacles, using them as leverage. The detective stumbled to her feet, then stared at my tentacles as they adjusted with my balance. I wasn't sure if it was a subconscious reaction, but I made them strobe slightly brighter when she stared. "Of course they're rainbows," she muttered, not quite laughing. "Lozzie once called them my lesbian limbs." I pulled an awkward smile. The detective arched an eyebrow, hunched in her coat, still using me as a handrail. "So, you've got tentacles, all the time? Just invisible normally?" "Yes. Well, sometimes I have to put them away, it does take effort to keep them out. Except, not anymore, not with the bioreactor in my abdomen," but I decided not to complicate Nicole's mind further by telling her about the pneumosomatic reactor inside my body. "They're just a reflection of what I'm meant to be. I'm sorry, I've scared you a bit. I should have said something first." Nah. Nicole straightened up and pulled a smile, tired and confused, but draping herself with the aura of professionalism once more. "They're very impressive. I won't lie and pretend I understand, but you do you, Heather. But why not anchor them in your back instead of your sides, though? It looks awkward." I sighed. "Are you an expert on tentacles?" "No. Sorry. Hell, I'm just trying to hold on to something concrete right now. We're out here standing on the bloody ethereal plane getting booped at by giant slugs, and you've got a set of rainbow tentacles. Cut me some slack, yeah. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to say something offensive. I think. Apology accepted, please don't worry about it." I felt just as awkward as Nicole looked. "I suppose there's no accepted etiquette for this, is there? Young women growing tentacles?" Not really. Well, they're in my sides because this is what I went with first, on reflex. Over time I've gotten used to it. I know it's not optimal, but it's what I've made. It's mine. That matters more." Nicole nodded along. "Yeah, sometimes you've just gotta roll with what works. I'm, happy for you. Is that appropriate?" I nodded back. "Thank you." As if putting weight on a tender injury, Nicole stepped back with exaggerated care, letting go of my hand at last. She moved slowly, until she was standing on her own 2 feet. She didn't look very steady. Her breathing was deep and slow, but shaking with pain and discomfort. She pressed a hand to the middle of her chest again. "Why are we talking about your tentacles anyway, huh?" She tried to laugh but couldn't quite get there. "Oh shit, this really hurts." I tried not to show any alarm. "That might have something to do with being outside. Did it hurt like this back in reality?" "Nah. A bit. Not like this though." She cast around again, up at the whirled sky and around at the nights. "This ain't what I was expecting. So what are these guys, the Knights of the Round Table? Lozzie made them. It's a long story. What were you expecting?" "I dunno. A lot more wibbly-wobblies. Not blokes in armor and giant insects that go boop." She huffed a laugh, but she sounded like a heavy smoker all of a sudden. "I've tried reading a bunch of Lovecraft since we met. Trying to get my head around the real world. He was probably onto something, but too far up his own arse." "Lovecraft?" Nicole straightened up by force of will, wincing through her teeth. She blinked at me. "You're telling me you've not read any Lovecraft? You're a squid person, your sister was kidnapped by an alien god, and you've not read any Lovecraft?" "Oh, him." I tooted. "No, it's all just stories." "Well, Evie says so, anyway." Still. Might have been onto something, right? Fragments of truth in fiction, yeah. Swat I think, anyway. Or maybe that's just how my mind works. Looking for details. I shrugged. I am dating a daughter of the king in yellow, so I can hardly speak. Nicole went very still. Oh, I'm sorry, I said, wincing with embarrassment. I didn't tell you about that. We're going to ask her for help now, with whatever on earth was going on back there. That's my plan, anyway. You know what? Forget I said anything. Sorry. Actually wait, unforget. Nicole frowned, tilting her head, discomfort briefly forgotten. Aren't you already with Rain? And Zheng, at the same time? Yes. So now you have 3 girlfriends. Nicole managed to make this question sound like so now you've won the lottery 3 times. 1 is technically a fiancé. Maybe 2. I cleared my throat. Evidently, I said. We need to get back and get help, and figure out what happened to you. Are you ready now? Nicole held up a hand. Whoa, can't we regroup? At least tell me what the hell was going on back there. With the darkness? And the spooky stuff? I have no idea, I'm sorry. Something similar to this happened to us a little while back, but it wasn't quite the same. This big guy was trying to eat us. Nicole's eyebrows shot up her forehead. Well, he wasn't a guy, he was a mage. Or had been a mage, once. But he'd been in the abyss, like me. Nicole's eyes kept getting wider. Actually, never mind. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's a bit above my pay grade. I tried to laugh. You get paid for this? If Miss Say will give me danger money, I'm not gonna turn it down. Though I'd prefer knowing what the hell was happening. I just don't know. It's like we were in one of those Hammer horror movies or something, it was all so silly. Hardly scary. Oh. Nicole was concealing it well, with all the professionalism of a lifelong public servant, a real one, no matter the realities of what she'd actually done while with the Sherriford police. But tucked away beneath her physical discomfort, her flippant comments, and her shock at being outside, Nicole Webb was terrified of going back. Sorry, she said, trying to pull herself together. Sorry. Sometimes I forget you're just a uni student. Nikki, this is nothing like that house we went to, where the cult had. Yeah, okay, yeah, she spoke over me, and quickly. I don't want to think about that. I get it. It's not the same, this is not the same at all. I won't let it be the same. Nicole stared back at me. I finally noticed how she was sweating, gone pale and waxen beneath her otherwise healthy complexion. Alright, chosen one. So, what do we do? We go back to the farm. Not straight back inside the house, but next to Rain's car. I think I can pinpoint that. Then we see what we can see. Maybe without you it'll all have collapsed, be back to normal. And if not? Then I'll call Lozzie. I'll talk to Sevens. She might be able to help. But she'll have to break the rules she set herself, won't she? I bit my bottom lip at that thought. She had offered. Muddle through it from there, hey. Nicole pulled a rueful smile. I get the picture, this is how you lot always operate. Not always, sometimes there's planning. But this is an emergency. Yeah, right. Okay, so, hold up a sec, because if we go back and I can't talk, then I can't tell you what happened to me, right? Oh, yes, of course. Please, explain. Please. Nicole blew out a long breath. A change came over her, a calming and quietening of her mind, visible in the tension of her facial muscles and the angle of her chin. She even closed her eyes briefly, then glanced around Camelot once more, perhaps anchoring herself in the undeniable reality of what she could see. It was yesterday afternoon, she said, with a flicker of her tongue over her lips, squinting a little with the effort of recall. She stared at the caterpillar as she spoke. I was in Manchester for a job, like I told you lot. Well, okay, actually I was in Stockport, but same thing. Don't let anybody from Manchester know I said that, though. She added a forced chuckle. Just didn't want to confuse Miss Say with more shaking my head. I was in the suburbs, supposed to be looking for this guy cheating on his wife. His lady friend's place is round there. But the husband is also paying me to counter-spy on the wife, because he's certain she's stealing money from his business. Whatever, probably doesn't matter. I parked just off the A6, next to this old church with a great big graveyard. For all I know my car's still there. Hope it is. She trailed off, eyes lost on the horizon. Nikki? She blinked hard. Sorry, yes. I was thinking. It's a little hard to think, right now. Outside is difficult to endure, I understand. We can go back as soon as you're ready. So, I parked up, she went on. Her voice faded as she spoke. Her attention couldn't seem to find me, eyelids blinking too much as she focused out at Camelot, or up at the whirled purple sky, or down at Marmite, cowering behind me. Then I walked into the graveyard for a little bit, to think. She fell silent again, sharp blue eyes staring out at nothing, gentle wind plucking at the hem of her long coat and the few strands of blonde hair that had escaped her bun. My gut clenched with worry. Nicole was not meant to be out here. Even the comparatively gentle effect of Camelot was too much for her mind. To think about the house we asked you to find? Well, no, that's the weird part. I was thinking about the job, making a plan. Not about you lot at all. Then I looked at the graves and the trees, and there was this one grave with a little statue of an angel, kinda tacky. It was naked, and. Nicole blinked very slowly and put her hand to her chest again, rubbing as if pained. And I did think about the stolen documents, she said. But only for a second. Maybe my subconscious was chewing on the puzzle, I dunno. I remember turning away and leaving the graveyard, and crossing the A6, but nothing after that. Not until I was on the edge of that farm. Exhausted, must have been walking all night. Doubt I slept. She snorted. They did feed me, you know. Nice people, the Hoptons. As long as their god doesn't take an interest in you, I guess. They're all right. So, Heather. Miss Morell. Any idea what happened to me? I bit my lip and shook my head. I'm sorry. If I use brain math, I might be able to unravel what's happened, or where you've been, or something, maybe. But first I have to use that to get us home. Nicole puffed out a long sigh, ending in a cough. She nodded and clapped a hand on my shoulder. I just gotta hold on to you, right? Tighter than that, please. You too, Marmite, I added over my shoulder. Nicole and I linked arms, firm and close. Marmite wrapped one segmented bony tentacle around my thigh again, a solid anchor. You're gonna call the rest of your friends, right? Nicole asked. For help, yes. Don't suppose you could swing somebody to my flat to go check on my dog? He's been alone overnight. He's got water, of course, but, you know. Dogs. She pulled a pained wince. Preferably before we get sucked back into a Scooby-Doo episode. I'll see if somebody is free. I'm surprised you can think about that, out here. Nicole shrugged, but her shaking breath gave away her fear. I got used to it, being a copper. Always gotta take your mind off how the sausage is made, you know. It'll be okay, Nikki, we're going to solve this. Easy for you to say, you're not about to be reduced to verbal diarrhea again. Once we're back, I'll fix it. We'll find a way. Nicole shared a sidelong look with me. Our faces were far too close. She sighed and rolled her eyes, though I got the impression it was unintentional. Hey, thanks, Wonder Tentacles. I appreciate it. Ready? Nah. What we really need is a cunning plan and a talking dog for a mascot. Or a firearms team loaded for ghosts. Or a priest. Marmite can be the mascot, I said. Ready? All right. Take us away, teleporter girl. Out. Gearswin Farm was back to normal. Shafts of mid-afternoon sunlight fell through the tangled canopy, dappling Rain's car and the other two vehicles. Brown tree trunks marched away in every direction, but stopped at the edge of the road back to Brinkwood. Green grass reflected the warm, bright, welcoming day. Out in the fields, two very normal alpacas stood amid their cluster of sheep, watching as Nicole and I heaved and panted, as I doubled over and tried not to vomit. The old farmhouse stood silent and still, the front door sensibly shut. 3 bubble servitors were perched in their guard positions on the roof, but nothing else lurked in wait. Quiet, rural, picturesque. Oh no, was the first thing out of my mouth once I pulled myself together and straightened up. My stomach roiled with anxiety. Isn't this a good thing? Nicole panted next to me. She'd stumbled a few paces away, blinking and shaking her head, wincing slowly with the shock of being shoved through the membrane from outside, but she was keeping it together. It's back to normal, that's good, right? Not if there's nobody here. I watched the front door, praying it would open and Rain would step out. I don't even know if we should go inside or not. Part of me wanted to sprint at the door and knock it down, calling for my friends. Another part of me wanted to curl up in the back seat of Rain's car and hide from the implications of all this. My tentacles certainly agreed. They were gripping Rain's car like a rock in a storm, like I was a delicate deep-sea mollusk amid strong currents and threatening tides. Your nose is bleeding, by the way, Nicole said. What? Oh. I sniffed hard and realized I could taste blood. 2 slips in quick succession had indeed given me a terrible nosebleed. A droplet rolled off my chin when I tilted my head forward. I scrubbed the mess on my sleeve and rummaged inside my hoodie for my mobile phone. Your tentacles are gone too. Don't remind me, I said, oddly pained by the fact Nicole couldn't see them. I held up my phone. My heart leapt. I had a signal. So's the little spider guy. Nicole put her hands on her hips and glanced behind me. You just can't see him. He's right there, I mumbled up a throat full of my own nosebleed. It's okay, Marmite. It's okay, boy. Marmite was still right behind me, taking shelter in the gap between the tarmac and the underside of Rain's car, trying to keep well clear of the high visibility patches of sunlight. He couldn't quite fit under the car though, he was too large. His black shadowy membranes weren't doing too well out here either, making him look like a big splotch of dirty laundry to any passing numismatic sight. But the bubble servitors on the roof paid him no mind. Look, I dunno about you, but I'm much happier out of whatever that trap was, Nicole said, hands on her hips, frowning at the house. Maybe it didn't even have anything to do with me. She raised her hands and cupped her mouth. Hello. Hey. I'm out here with Heather. Hello. We waited for a long moment, but the only reply was the rustle of leaves and the creak of tree trunks in the gentle wind. I jabbed at my phone, found Lozzie's number, and hit the call button. Look on the bright side, Nicole went on. My chest doesn't hurt anymore, and I'm still speaking like Tiger refracted but without seals upon the lips of the Buddha. She paused, shared a look with me, then let out a gigantic sigh. I'm so sorry, I said. Screen thought to fractal process, she huffed, exasperated beyond words literally. She threw her hands in the air and took a couple of experimental steps forward, then wobbled as her balance seemed to give out. Nicole tilted her head to look at her own feet like they were very naughty children about to get arrested and given an official caution. Noodle, she spat. Noodle, indeed, I whispered, phone to my ear. Please pick up, Lozzie, please please. With a click and a squeal, my prayers were answered. Lozzie? Lozzie? All I heard from the other end was distant giggling and somebody going sh, barely audible over the sudden rustle of leaves in a gust of wind. My heart sank. Were we still in the trap? Was the phone call corrupted, the same as it had been when I'd called Evelyn from inside Orange Juice's mouth? Then Lozzie's voice slapped against the phone. Heathy. Lozzie. Hey 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 hee, she said, floaty yet heavy, as if half asleep. Everything good? Goody good goodies. Heathy Heaths. Oh, she sounds worse than me, a voice slurred somewhere behind Lozzie, more distant from the phone. Was that Jan? She sounded impaired somehow, speaking too slowly. Get her off that. I will not enforce anything here, said a third voice, stern and cold. That was July, no doubt about it. Lozzie? What's going on? The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. I winced, bracing for a torrent of nonsense, for this voice on the phone to not actually be Lozzie, but an imitation about to pour vile insults or horrifying suggestions into my ears. But Lozzie just giggled, as if she couldn't help it. Nothing. In the background, somebody gurgled, sleepy and irritated. Nicole was staring at me with mounting disbelief. She tried to say something, stopped, and mimed a drinking action. I just shook my head, there was no way. Lozzie, I'm sorry, yet another voice said, much closer to the phone, quivering with nervous tension. May I talk to Heather? Please, yes, thank you, The phone changed hands with a soft rustle. Hello. Hello. I snapped, starting to lose patience. We are in actual trouble here, I need help. Heather, hello, I'm so sorry about this. It took me a moment to recognize the anxious quiver and habitual fear. Kimberly. Is that you? Yes, it's me. I'm sorry. Her voice was trembling with worry, as if she was afraid of getting slapped. I'm so sorry, I tried to enforce some responsibility on this situation but... My fault. Jan called from somewhere behind the phone, ending her words with a slap of flesh on flesh. My fault, blame me, I put down the cash. Kim, what is happening there? A swallow, dry and hard. I couldn't say no. This January. Jan. Just Jan for you, sweet pea, said Jan. Jan, Kimberly corrected herself with a pained sigh. She offered me £500. I couldn't say no. For what? I boggled at Nicole over on this end of the conversation. Nicole just rolled her eyes. Some you know. Some green. Kimberly's voice dropped to a murmur. Some cannabis. You mean you're all high? I couldn't quite process this information. My brain lacked the slot for this shape. Kimberly gushed with apologies and stammered to explain herself. But then she went, oof, and Lozzie's voice returned, close to the phone again. I assumed Lozzie had jumped on her back. Not Tenny. Lozzie informed me, proudly. Tens and Whistle are upstairs playing video games. No mind-altering substances for Tens until she's bigger. And not for dogs. Yes, of course, Kimberly agreed all in a rush. Not for dogs or Tenny, that was very important, I wouldn't have said yes if it wasn't for that, and I'm so sorry, Heather. I'm sorry, Kim, I said, snapping harder than I'd intended. Kim, is Sevens there? We need help, something has gone badly wrong, and I don't have anybody else to turn to. Please don't tell me she's high as well. A little bit. Gurr came a long and irritated gurgle. Somebody yelped, at least two voices giggled, and something clacked loudly against the phone. Heather, came Seven's raspy voice a moment later, thick and fuzzy with relaxation. What happened? Sevens. I snapped her name too. I left you there to be the responsible one. We're in trouble, I need your help. But you're impaired. How can you be? Look, I'm going to come and get you, with a slip, we need help. Three things happened at once. On the other end of the call, the phone clattered to the ground, hard enough to make me wince. Jan raised her voice in sudden alarm. Whoa, okay, what? Lozzie was babbling something about doing a big whoopsie. And a split second later, appearing like a glint of dawn on brass, the yellow princess stepped from nowhere and stood just in front of Rain's car. A splash of gold amid the green and brown, 7 shades of sunlight wore her aristocratic mask like a well-fitting glove, a second skin over flesh that none but I had ever seen. Impassive blue eyes framed by knife-sharp features, hair cut level and straight at her neck. She wore a crisp white blouse and long yellow skirt, expertly curved and starched and without a single crease. The metal tip of her umbrella clacked against the tarmac, as if she was just stopping by in the middle of a casual stroll. She greeted me with a tiny widening of her eyes. Sevens. I sighed with relief, letting my phone drop from my ear. On the other end, Jan did not sound too happy. I killed the call without bothering to inform them that Sevens had joined us. Lozzie could figure that out, I was sure. You call and I come, kitten, said 7 shades of suddenly by my side, calm and cool. In more ways than one. TCH. I tooted, but I couldn't keep the smile off my face. It's hardly the time for that. We're in a lot of trouble and I think you might be able to help. Am I your last resort? Is that my role in your life? I juddered to a halt, suddenly horrified. 7 shades of sunlight gazed at me with that ice-cold expression, unreadable and unknowable. Had I hurt her? Was she joking, or was this serious? Had I ruined all the progress she'd made in her long process of self-redefinition? I studied her face, but I was suddenly reminded that what stood before me was a mask. No, I managed to say. I mean, you offered to. And I always will, she said, ice-cold precision in every word. I should have come with you. Her eyes flickered first to Nicole, then down to Marmite, then back to me. The detective and a spider. Interesting companions. Where is everybody else? Nicole gave me a dubious look, pointed at Sevens, and shrugged a silent question. This is Sevens, I explained, the lady I mentioned before, the daughter of the. Nicole waved that down and shook her head. She didn't want to know. I know of you, detective, said Sevens. I respect your craft and your experience. That is all we require for now. We have a problem to solve. Issues of identity can be addressed later. Even yours, if you wish it so. That set an additional alarm bell ringing in my head, but I muffled it for the moment. Sevens, thank you. Thank you for coming so quickly. I had no idea you even could. I hope this hasn't hurt you. I meant what I said about retaining your progress. I don't want this to, I sighed, rubbing my chest, trying to still my nauseating worry. My tentacles tightened their grip on Rain's car. I didn't know you could teleport from place to place, I added, awkwardly. I suppose you've done that before, though. I cannot, Seven said. But I can come to you, my beloved. Wherever you may be. Nicole laughed at that, a slim relief amid this growing confusion. I blushed and resisted an urge to roll my eyes. Quickly, with the minimum of confusion that I could achieve, I informed Sevens about what had happened. She wasn't a literal mind reader, after all. She listened closely, without nodding, eyes boring into me, the sunlight shifting and fluttering across her face as it filtered through the leaves above. When I described the absurd and spooky alpaca, she turned briefly to consider the animals in the field. They were slowly trotting across the grass and mud to come look at what we were doing. They looked perfectly normal now. As I spoke, I realized that the alpaca and the sheep weren't the only parties interested in Sevens. Cringe-Windla's bubble servitors, the 3 of them which hadn't entered the trap, had all gathered at the front of the roof, craning forward like rearing slugs made of soap suds. They had neither faces nor eyes, but somehow I could tell they were focused on Sevens. Yet they were unwilling to risk warding her off, like guard dogs staring through a fence at a stray Komodo dragon. And then we came back from outside, I finished. Nikki's speech is all jumbled again. Typists and secretaries writing with invisible ink, Nicole said. She threw up her hands. Seven stared at her for a moment, then back at me, then over at the house, as if considering nothing more important than what blend of tea to select for her afternoon repast. She said nothing, but blinked once, slowly. Sunlight moved across the clearing. The sheep in the field nosed at the fence. It was so peaceful here, but my chest hurt and my stomach roiled. I'm really worried about everybody else, I said. I don't understand where they physically are. And there's children in there, too, Amanda's children. Bystanders. You took something outside, said Sevens. When you removed the detective from the situation. Outside, that thing became different. Pain in the detective's chest. Oh, I said. Nicole shared a worried glance with me. Outside, it ceased to work as it does here, above the surface. Upon return, it resumed. The detective's pain stopped. Her language fails once more. That makes sense, I said, swallowing hard. Nicole was starting to look very worried indeed. 7 shades of serious suspicion turned to watch Nicole, tilting her head to one side. The detective spread her arms and did a little sarcastic bow with her head, asking if Sevens wanted her to do a twirl. No, detective, that is quite all right, said Sevens. I suspect this is not a matter of combat, it is a matter of. Sevens slammed to a halt mid-word, lips quivering on an unformed thought. She blinked several times, eyes looking right through Nicole, face gone pale and waxen, as if a wave of sudden nausea had gripped her stomach. She even leaned forward slightly, as if preparing to vomit. I knew that pose and that feeling all too well. But I'd never seen the princess mask like that. Sevens. Instinctively I grabbed for her with my tentacles, letting go of Rain's car and wrapping one around her waist instead, then another around her shoulders, creasing her perfectly pressed outfit. 7 shades of deep distress turned to me, breathing hard and unsteady. I have been infected, she said. What? I'm sorry. We may as well be standing waist deep in tidewater mud. My nature has not afforded me any immunity. Sevens took a deep breath with considerable effort, then nodded at Nicole. She is carrying a parasite. Everyone in contact with her has been infected. I am no exception. Nicole stared back at Sevens, wide-eyed with horror. Her hand went to her own chest. A parasite? Sevens, what do you mean? Not a physical creature. A parasite of information, designed to infect the mind that was looking for the hiding place of Edward Lilburn. She paused, still sweating and pale, turning almost gray with effort or fear. It has cornered me. I have no options. Let go of me, kitten, please. Don't call me kitten at a moment like this. Sevens, what do you mean, what are you going to do? I must go outside, where the parasite becomes a physical thing, and assume a form it cannot inhabit. Nicole gripped her own chest, where she'd been feeling the pain while outside. A physical thing? A parasite inside her chest. Sevens wouldn't look at me, but I knew her too well to be fooled. 7 shades of subterfuge was hiding something, or leaving something unsaid. Sevens. Wouldn't going outside and changing be cheat? I must remove this thing before it takes root, she said, precise and cold. It has found fears in a language it understands, albeit childish ones. The darkness, the altered animals, these are coming from a human interface, but implemented via something greater. Amanda Hopton's fears, with Fringe Windla's powers as the implementation. I would wager that Amanda Hopton does not like horror fiction. Wait, you mean all of that stuff is coming from her mind? Probably. Probably. There is no time to be certain. I must be quick. Sevens placed her free hand on the tentacle around her waist, gently trying to peel me off her. But her hand was weak and shaking, her skin clammy and cold. Let go of me. Sevens, if you go outside and change. 7 shades of sunlight finally looked at me. I am both human and not human. If this thing takes root inside me, it will have access to far worse fears from which to weave its false world. And greater stages on which to play them out. I am cornered. She tried to explain carefully. I must turn and fight. Great ones, but not the apes alone. Nicole asked, frowning hard. She was trying to keep up. Sevens nodded at her, curt but respectful. That kind of made sense. I said. Yes, Sevens explained. This parasite is information, not intent. It was designed to obfuscate for human minds, not outsider ones. It has spilled over into something it was not meant to touch and is rapidly metastasizing. With you, detective, confusion was the aim, and would likely have worn off once you had moved on. But then you met Amanda Hopton, and the parasite now grows in fertile flesh it should never have had access to, that of a god. It is our good fortune this god understands human fears as the sum of black and white horror movies, because his current mortal paramour hid behind the sofa as a child. But now it has me. Oh. Oh no, I said, mouth going dry as I finally understood. I must assume another form. Let go. Sevens, no. I snapped, holding her even tighter. What about me? I'm not really human anymore either, what's it doing inside me? Sevens opened her mouth with a wet click. Her spine straightened, ready to shut me down, to deploy just a sliver of that aristocratic bearing to overrule me. I wondered if this was why she'd appeared as the princess, not the blood goblin. But then she paused. She looked me up and down with admiration and appreciation, and said, Ah. Ah. Ah what? Sevens. You are not infected. You are immune. You have been subject to the projection only, via Hringwindla's own infection, not the jumbling of direction and meaning. Oh. I couldn't see the jumbled doors and stuff. You're right. Nicole raised a fist in mute, provisional triumph. This is not all a good thing, kitten, Sevens purred. It means you are subject to the effect, leaking from others, without ever being able to identify the cause inside yourself. Immunity denies you access. Without cause, how can one observe? Okay, fine. I huffed. But what do we do, practically? I'm not letting you go outside and changing yourself, Sevens, I'm not letting you undo all the progress you've made with finding yourself, even for an emergency, even for this. How do I? My throat went dry and my words trailed off as I realized what I was about to suggest. Yes. Sevens nodded, very matter of fact. The other method of removal would be for you to share your immune system. I've done that with Zheng before. I know that's a thing I can do, I think. And Zheng shared hers with Rain, earlier today. They may both be immune, too. Lucky ladies, little kitten. Will you include me among their number? I huffed and rolled my eyes. You don't have to make it so sexual. Because if you don't do so, and quickly, then things are about to get a lot spookier. The spore is germinating. Look around, my beloved. 7 shades of seriously scared was correct. Gearswin Farm was beginning to change once again, but not like before. The golden yellow sunlight filtering through the leaves was turning a wintry gray, thick and heavy with the threat of snow. As the 4 of us looked up, including Marmite peering out from beneath Rain's car, the wind went still and a few flakes began to fall, drifting through the quiet air. Not just out of season, but the wrong temperature. It was not growing cold. Several flakes dusted my hair and my shoulders. I reached out and caught one in my hand. It wasn't snow at all. It was ash. A smell of burning meat tickled my nose, not the dreaded pork-like scent of human flesh, but something utterly wrong, the stench made by an alien funeral pyre. My stomach clenched in disgust and I shivered as I brushed the ash from my hair and flipped my hood up. The farmhouse itself seemed to leer at us, as if the tight, latticed windows had become empty eye sockets. A giant skull on an ash-strewn plain. The grass, the weeds, the plants, all turned slowly pale, withered by drought and cracked soil, the ash piling up to obscure everything. Off in the field, the pair of alpacas and the little cluster of sheep slowly sat down, lowering their heads and going very still. Ash began to cover their bodies. Nicole looked horrified. She was seeing this too, clear as the suddenly fading day. Marmite tried to cram himself deeper beneath Rain's car, but he couldn't quite fit. His clawed climbing limbs scrabbled and scratched at the tarmac. Sevens, my voice came out in a squeak. This isn't real, this is an illusion, correct? You said it was a parasite, making us see things, warping reality with ringy cringe whatever's power, yes? So this isn't. What happens on the stage is always real. The hand holds the knife and makes the stroke, even if the intent is pure invention. Your immune system, your white blood cells. Now, little kitten, or the struggle will be worse. Okay. But how? I felt a twitch in the tip of one of my tentacles, the merest suggestion of biosteel delivery system, needle and fluid. But that wasn't my immune system, that was something else, something I barely understood yet. Blood, said Sevens. For myself, a droplet or two should suffice. Oh. I lit up with relief. Blood would be easy enough. Do you want to bite me, as your vampire mask? No, she said, gentle but quick. Never mix business and pleasure. Speed is of the essence. I nodded and got to work. With a flicker of one of my free tentacles, I turned the tip into a millimeter worth of razor blade, then braced, winced, and forced the sharp edge against the pad of my own left thumb. I had to close my eyes and not look at the moment I sliced into my flesh. Nicole watched in mounting horror, though all she could see was a tiny cut suddenly open on my thumb. I raised the miniature wound toward Sevens. Here, take whatever you need. Before I could consider the necessary logistics of feeding my abyssal white blood cells to an outsider princess of the Yellow Court, Sevens grabbed my hand in hers, cool and quick, cradling my wrist like I was made of sugar glass. Ashen flakes fell upon her yellow blonde hair as she raised my hand to her mouth in the gathering darkness. I blushed and made to look away as her lips pressed to the blood dripping from the pad of my thumb, but she had other ideas. Sevens lapped a droplet of blood from my skin, then yanked my wrist so I fell against her. I yelped. Then she pressed her lips to mine, kissing my own blood back into my mouth. She tasted of iron under sunlight, wheat soaked with rain, and blood-thickened butter. I broke away from her in shock, though I didn't let go with my tentacles, I did not reject her. Sevens. I squeaked. One would think you were used to the flavor of your own veins, she answered, cool and collected, as if we hadn't just snogged in the middle of a serious emergency, rapidly getting covered in meat ash. Her lips were red with my taste, the impression of her still on my mouth. Ash fell behind her and around her, piling on the ground. The house had gone gray and old, forgotten and barren. Yes, but that's rather beside the point now. I thought you said don't mix business and pleasure. Nicole was watching us with confused shock, with the kind of expression that said, why are these dykes making out when the air smells of burning flesh and the world is turning dark? With you, kitten, it is all pleasure, Seven said. She licked me off her lips. Even amid all this, I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Fine. More importantly, is it working? I believe so. Give your blessing a moment to. 7 shades of sunlight stopped again, the same as she had before, as if racked by a sudden wave of carefully concealed nausea. This time I was already holding her in my tentacles, ready to assist. But this time, the base of her throat bulged outward. Something was inside her. For a split second, the Yellow Princess lost all her calm, all her composure, all her perfect poise. She grabbed at my arm, eyes bulging with panic, and then she was gone, replaced, mask stripped away. Sevens the blood goblin lay wrapped in my tentacles, panicking and choking, something writhing inside her throat. The princess mask had encountered an emotional state it could not support. Nicole actually stumbled back in surprise. Of course, she had no explanation for this, she'd only just met Sevens, let alone witnessed her transition from one mask to another. Sevens couldn't even speak, eyes bulging, choking past the suddenly very physical parasite. I did the only thing that made any sense. I whipped a tentacle through the air and slid it smoothly down her throat. I didn't stop to consider the implications. If a bystander, say, Rain, had suggested the slightest innuendo about this moment, I would have slapped her, well-meaning or not. This was pure instinct, the need to get this thing out of my friend, my partner, my beloved, the need to protect her body. Whether she was real or abyssal illusion or anything else, it was her and it had been invaded. Abyssal instinct demanded I remove the source of the infection. Having a tentacle down Seven's throat was a unique and bizarre experience. She gagged and shook. I felt myself slide past thin lips, needle-sharp teeth, raspy little tongue, then bumped down into her trachea. Then I felt something else, lodged in her flesh, coated with cold slime and hooked barbs. Sevens gagged and tried to retch, thrashing against my tentacles. I gripped her harder, trying to get this over with as quickly as possible, the tip of my tentacle wrapping around the parasite in her throat. But it wriggled lower, slipping downward into her body. Sevens grabbed for my arm and dug her fingernails into my skin. I squeezed another 6 or 7 inches of tentacle past her lips. This time I didn't apply half measures. Inside the wet darkness of her throat, I made suckers and adhesive enzymes and slapped my tentacle against the wriggling parasite, melting its spikes and trapping a dozen tiny limbs with my own precise muscles. With a horrible wet slurp noise, I dragged the parasite up Seven's throat, out of her mouth, and into the open air. Sevens. Sevens, are you okay? 7 shades of shock and spluttering whined and sagged in my grip, leaning against me and drooling from slack lips, exhausted and spent. No, she rasped. Didn't expect that would make it physical. Are you okay, though? Will be. Kill it, please. What? Oh. EW. I finally looked up at the thing I was holding in my tentacle, and wrinkled my nose in disgust. It was like a big gray limbless shrimp crossed with a slug, about the size of a hot dog, dotted with half-melted spines and hooks, curling and flexing in a futile attempt to escape my grasp. I was vaguely aware that it was, on some level, not real. It had been forced into physicality by my abyssal immune system, borrowed by Sevens. My head hurt when I thought about that too closely. I'm sure the eyes lessons contained the exact mathematics to explain how that all worked, but it was hardly the time to go dredging. Instead, I slapped the parasite on the tarmac, hard enough to kill it. The thing stopped wriggling and went still. Ash slowly ceased to fall. The sky began to brighten. Out in the field, one of the alpacas stumbled to its feet. Ugh, Sevens gurgled. I helped her stand up. Red on black eyes blinked heavily, first at Marmite, then at Nicole. What now? I asked, looking up at Nicole, at the center of her chest and her throat. The detective shook her head, eyes wide with terror, clutching her own chest. No, Sevens rasped. Same procedure would kill a human. Don't try with her. She tilted her head to peer at Marmite, still half-crammed under Rain's car. He's safe though. Come out, come on. You ain't got nothing in you, little one. Marmite stayed firmly under the car, not convinced by a gurgling, drooling, sagging vampire girl upon whom I just performed emergency surgery. Sevens, what do we do now? I asked. How do we get everyone else out of the spooky house? Find Hringe-Windla. Pardon? Sevens looked up at me, pulling quite the pained grimace, lips covered in blood-speckled drool. Find Hringe-Windla. Immunize him. Pull out the parasite. His might be a bit bigger, though. Find Fringewindla? I echoed. The suggestion. A sinking feeling settled into the pit of my stomach. The parasite might be bigger. Sevens, what does that mean? I tried not to look at the smashed remains of the gray shrimp slug parasite, lying on the tarmac in the dappled sunlight next to Rain's car. Bigger, said Sevens in her habitual goblin rasp. She licked flecks of her own blood off her lips, from where I'd dragged the parasite out of her throat. Bigger. Bigger. You know. Large. More size. I struggled very hard not to give Sevens a nasty look as she coiled there in the embrace of my tentacles. Yes, I said, I do know the literal definition of bigger, but what does that mean in the context of an outsider god? Pardon me for being rather concerned here. How much bigger? The size of a cat, or a horse, or are we about to have some kind of Godzilla incident? Do I need to show you one of those giant robot shows so you can wear an appropriate mask for this? Should we be calling your sister, Melancholy, so she can turn into a giant cat and eat it for us? Help me here, Sevens. How much bigger? Bureau, Sevens gurgled, clearing her throat very loudly. I couldn't blame her for that, considering what had been lodged in there only minutes earlier. She ducked her head, avoiding my frown. I dunno. Bigger. Nicole gave me the kind of look that I like to imagine she would have given other police officers over an unexplained dead body. She looked about ready to call in the army, jumbled words and wobbly legs or not. It's all right, Nikki, I said. It's probably not a Godzilla situation. I don't think that can happen. Nicole gave me another look that said, you think? I don't know what I'm doing, okay? We need to think. Does Fringewindla even have a throat? Sevens shrugged again. You know. On the plus side, I was finally able to pronounce Fringewindla correctly, by copying Sevens. I learn something new every day, even if it's something I'd rather not know. At least the sky wasn't turning to ash and darkness anymore. The optimistic sunlight of mid-afternoon was flooding back through the ring of trees that surrounded Gearswin Farm. The only patch of darkness left was Marmite and his imitation shadow membranes, still half-crammed beneath Rain's car, trying to hide from the open spaces and the sunlight, and probably from me too, after he'd just seen me ram a tentacle down Seven's throat. The grass was green and healthy, laced with low moss and tall thistles and thick clumps of weed. The wind had died down to a mere whisper through the woods, and no longer carried the scent of burning alien meat. The ash had vanished, as if absorbed into the ground. One of the alpacas had wandered all the way up to the edge of the nearest fence, probably to investigate what we were up to. Alpaca snout, fuzzy and cute, with normal, wide-set, black eyes beneath a big tuft of brown fur, exactly as an alpaca should be. No human face, no bloody teeth. Gearswin farmhouse was dead silent. Are we certain that we're back in reality now? I asked. Blee, went the alpaca. Yeah, said Sevens. She cracked her neck and bared her mouth of sharp little needle teeth at which Nicole managed to go even wider-eyed with concern. Amanda doesn't know where we are, so Cringe-Winge-Face doesn't either, so we're not all jumbled up. Septemem. She raised one pale, long-fingered hand and pointed up at the trio of bubble servitors on the roof of the farmhouse. They were still poised at the edge, craning toward us like giant marine mollusks from a lip of rock, spooked by the presence of 7 shades of unexpectedly powerful. Might be bad, Sevens explained. Oh. Oh dear. You think they have direct communication with him? Can't do. Sevens had to clear her throat again. Else we'd already be back in his nightmare. His nightmare? Sevens nodded. She wavered for a moment, visibly thinking, then bumped her head against my tentacles, like a cat nuzzling a person's hand. He's having a nightmare. Parasite symptom. That's what all that was, kind of. I think. I sighed. At least your metaphors are easier to understand than Lozzie's. So we find Fringewindla, wake him up, whatever that means for an outsider in this context, and remove his parasite. With the three of us? And Marmite, of course. Ship of fools, Nicole spat. I winced. Yes, I couldn't agree more. We're alone, in the middle of the woods. Nicole can hardly walk without stumbling. Sevens, you're very powerful, but you're self-limited, and with good reason. I don't want to do any more damage to you than I already have done. No damage. And no choice. We gotta. And we're going to introduce ourselves to an actual outsider, a real one, something that self-describes as a god, and what, deworm him. Yeah. Sevens cringed into one of my tentacles, using me like a pillow. Nicole laughed. Apparently she could still do that without getting scrambled. Besides, do we even know where he is? I ran my eyes along the edge of the tree line, where the shadows gathered between the trunks. I think Evie mentioned something about an old church out here in the woods, once. But that was months ago, I can hardly recall it now. Schismatic prismatic, Nicole said. She sucked on her teeth, a serious frown on her brow. Nicky? You might know where the church is? Nicole huffed and shook her head. Quakers and quackers and diggers and levelers. World turned upside down. The king's head on a spike of obsidian, but forgotten amid the ruckus. I stared at her, blinking in shock. Her words had shaken a memory loose inside my head. That almost made sense. Evie said something about Quakers, once. With a great deal of effort, I cast my mind back all the way to last year, to when I'd first met Twill and we discussed the Brinkwood cult. That was more challenging than it sounds, because the last 9 months of my life had been a whirlwind of change. My grandmother had them well documented, Evelyn had said, back then. From a safe distance. They probably started as a group of Quakers, tried to rebuild the abandoned church out in the woods, where Lodon village used to be. That's about 3 miles north of Brinkwood. Lodon village? I said out loud. Nicole pulled a thinking face, but she seemed doubtful. I think Evie said it was 3 miles north of Brinkwood itself, I said. But finding an old church in these woods? We could walk right past it and never know. And that's not even accounting for what's actually inside. Or guarding it. Evie knew things about the Brinkwood cult, but she's not here right now. We need her. Or Twill, I suppose. Leeches and poultices, Nicole said. Bone setting into the sunset beyond the furthest waves. Nicky? Oh. Nicole wasn't deep in thought anymore. She was staring at Sevens with a different kind of worried frown. Marmite had gone very still as well, all his cone eyes fixed on my sweet little faux vampire. Sevens was pulled tight in my tentacle embrace like a bat in the roof of a cave, her limbs pulled inward and her shoulders hunched, a pair of tiny red points deep in the coal black of her eyes. She had retreated behind the curtain of her own dark, stringy hair, but that could not conceal the animalistic fixation on her face as she stared at me. Her jaw hung open, her breathing a steady hiss between rows of needle-sharp teeth. Sevens. Oh, right. She wasn't making eye contact with me, she was staring at the blood, my blood, smeared across my face from my earlier nosebleed, and from the bloody kiss we'd shared. I put a hand over my lower face to spare her the awkward temptation. Also to hide my blush. Sevens blinked hard, like a sleepwalker coming around from deep dreams. She swallowed with a little upward tilt of her head, rasping deep in her throat and forcing her shoulders straight. Sorry, Lego. Lego? Let go, please. Oh, of course. The moment I unwound my tentacles from around 7 shades of sanguine solicitation, she quickly stumbled back with a little hopping motion, bare feet scrunched against the sun-speckled tarmac. On the third hop-step skip the blood goblin vanished, replaced instantly with the yellow princess once again. 7 shades of regained composure let out the tiniest sigh, smoothed her yellow skirt over her hips, and clicked her fingers. Her umbrella appeared in her hand. She did a little flourish and clicked the tip against the ground. Nicole actually flinched, then looked at me for some kind of explanation. "Circus tents filled to the brim with rotting fish?" she asked. "Sorry," I said. "Sevens is not what you see here. But she also is. It's complicated and you probably don't want to know. Also, this is absolutely not the time to explain. I am exactly what I appear to be and I arrive precisely when I mean to," said the Princess Mask, cool and confident, addressing Nicole. Though perhaps I ought not to claim kinship with that particular expression. I am no wizard, after all. Nicole gave her such a look, deadpan and unimpressed in the extreme. "Ah," said Sevens. Did I detect a hint of sarcasm beneath her tone? "Are you not one for the mommy-dommy vibes, detective?" Nicole clenched her jaw and made a fist. "Sevens," I said a little too firmly, trying to regain control of the situation before my only support decided to either fight or flirt with each other. "I'm so sorry about the blood." I gestured at my face. I should have accounted for it being tempting. "I apologize." "Worry not," said Sevens. She sounded perfectly fine, but it was always hard to tell with the princess. I took a moment to gather myself and scrub the rest of the blood from around my nose and mouth. I couldn't tell how much had come from my slip-induced nosebleed and how much from the strange blood kiss with the princess. A trace of my blood still graced her lips, glinting in the sunlight like obscene lipstick. I finally pulled in the tentacle I'd used to fish the parasite out of her throat, and carefully cleaned off the tip with some wet wipes from inside Rain's car, not wanting to leave any trace of the disgusting creature on my flesh, pneumosomatic or not. But Seven's saliva I just wiped on my hoodie. Why not? I was already stained with blood, yet again. "We can't confront an outsider god by ourselves," I said as I cleaned up. "We have two options," Seven Shades explained into the momentary quiet. "We can attempt to find Hringewindla himself," as I said, "or we can plunge back into his living nightmare and attempt to retrieve the others." She gestured at the house with one perfect hand. "I thought you said we'd have to bump into Amanda for that." "In theory. I suspect we could simply wander around the house and be drawn in. It is the current location of his nightmare. However, it would get us nowhere. As the parasite grows, so will the nightmare." I bit my lip. "North, 3 miles. But we could walk right past the church." I didn't even know what it looked like, what to expect, what to prepare for. We knew nothing. "Nicole can barely walk in a straight line," I repeated, mostly to myself. But then I looked at the detective, wearing her long coat and worried frown. "What do you want to do, Nikki? Should we leave you here while we try to deal with this?" Nicole puffed out a sigh, shrugged, and took an experimental step forward. She managed 3 paces before almost losing her balance, wobbling on the spot and windmilling her arms. I stuck out a tentacle to help keep her on her feet, which made her flinch and almost fall over the other way. She caught herself, hissed with frustration, and shot me a frown. Sorry. I blurted out when she was finally safe, mortified and blushing. "Sorry, that was me, oh, goodness." My voice cracked. "We're not the team for this. This is farcical. I've got to get Nicole back on her feet, at least. Sevens, are you sure that I can't somehow remove the parasite from her?" Nicole pulled a grimace. Sevens fixed me with a cool, level stare. Attempting the same procedure on a real human being would cause a lot of damage to their throat, esophagus, mouth, tongue, possibly teeth. Remember what I am. My flesh is. Sevens paused with the merest hint of melancholy. My flesh is not true, though I treat it as if it is. She pointed at the dead parasite on the tarmac with the tip of her umbrella. Pull the same thing out of the detective's throat and her own blood will begin to pool in her lungs. Not to mention the pain. Considerable pain. I shared a horrified look with Nicole. Then how are we ever going to get it out? There may be magical methods, said Sevens. To remove it without making it physical. Not every situation is an emergency, kitten. The detective is alive and well, and will remain so. I ignored that kitten for now. Does this mean everyone else in the house has one of these parasites in them now? I can't just leave everyone here, not Rain and Evelyn, they're both only human. Twill, Zheng, Preem, maybe they'll fare better, but... Kitten. Stop kittening me. Listen to me, kitten. Sevens clacked the tip of her umbrella on the tarmac and took 2 smart steps forward, until she was inches from me. My tentacles whirled up in surprise, as if she was an unknown attacker, but she didn't blink or flinch. The detective's parasite has already reactivated, although the primary effect is wearing off. Her balance is returning. Zheng and Rain will be immune due to the presence of your blessing in Zheng's blood. Then why aren't they here? Where is everybody? Inside the nightmare of a god. But what does that mean? The yellow princess blinked once, slowly. You know this. True outsiders are not meant to be here, on Earth. Those who have swum the abyss have a strange and unstable relationship with notions of reality. You and I, precious little Lozzie. Urin Ju. Cringe-Windla. It is the same. The others are stuck in his nightmare, a nightmare built by the memories and life of his human companionship. That is all. I chewed on my lip. Nicole sighed, making a spinning motion with one fingertip over her temple. Rain and Zheng will be immune to personal infection, Sevens continued, fixated on me like a searchlight. But they are still stuck in the nightmare. Preem, I do not know. Her soul may not possess the right pneumosomatic architecture to be infected. Twill and Evelyn, very likely. But none of them know the location of Edward's house, none of them have been exposed to the parasite's trigger, like the detective here. Nicole's eyebrows climbed her forehead. She finally understood. Yesterday, standing in an unrelated graveyard, many miles away, her subconscious had put together the clues from the documents she'd stolen, and the parasite had whirled to life to stop her consciously realizing the location of Edward's house. Pure chance. Evie, I murmured. She'll be terrified by this, even if she is with Preem. I can't go, I can't leave her here, not in all that. There has to be a way to get her out. I know how you feel, beloved. Believe me, I know. I turned back to the house, so placid and normal now, a lovely old farmhouse deep in the woods, covered in shifting bars of sunlight through the dense canopy of leaves. But inside was a raging nightmare of jumbled corridors and phantom hallways, unnatural darkness and spooky alpacas with human faces, the sum of all the absurd fears of Amanda Hopton, projected by the powers of a god. Oh gosh, I do hope her children are okay in there, too. We could wander the nightmare for months without finding each other, said Sevens. Without finding anybody. But it will collapse without Cringe-Windla's parasite. Evie would be able to help us, I said, trying to convince myself. She is a mage, remember? And when I glimpsed her, she was trying to get out, she was trying to figure something out. Maybe she's already trying. I bit my lip and focused on the house, clenching and unclenching my hands, subconsciously preparing myself for pain. Kitten. SH. I'm trying to think. I wished I could pull everyone out of that house, but the others weren't mages. If Evelyn was already working on escaping, perhaps I could light a beacon for her to follow. Evelyn was a better mage than she gave herself credit for. Though I had few comparisons and terrible experiences with other mages, I had faith in her. Faith in her drive to survive and escape. The Evelyn of today was not the defeated and broken woman who had tried to throw herself away in the library of Carcosa. She would not curl up in a ball and sob to herself in a dark corner, certainly not with Preem at her side. And not with me to light her way. I stuck one of my tentacles straight up in the air. Strictly speaking, the gesture was not necessary, I was not going to create a physical beacon by flashing my rainbow strobing flesh at maximum brightness, though Lozzie would probably be delighted at that idea. It was a sympathetic gesture, like taking a step forward when slipping, like ancient Latin intoned for a spell, like bowing one's head in supplication to an outsider god. Except, I was only trying to remember a lesson. Beacon, I thought, and I plunged down into the oily black darkness of my own repressed nightmares, the memories of the eye's nightly instruction, the toxic machinery held in suspended animation in my subconscious. The equation was mercifully simple, far easier and more straightforward than slipping, a mere blink across the surface of my mind, a piece of loose driftwood bobbing to the surface of the abyssal ocean. But my raised tentacle did indeed pulse like a beacon, a triple flash of rainbow, an alien light beneath the terrestrial sun. I think Marmite tried to hide from that, poor thing. I winced through a spike of headache and felt a single bead of blood leak from my right nostril. I'm getting better at this, I thought. Sevens grabbed my arm to steady me and stop me from crumpling to my knees. Heather, beloved, she said, cool and crisp and clear. You are a guidepost of flesh, and that is beautiful, but even you cannot reach into the dreams of a. The front door of Gearswin farmhouse banged open so hard I was afraid it was going to fly off the hinges. Preem lowered her boot, marched down the brick steps, and joined us on the tarmac. She was carrying Evelyn, piggyback style. Evie. Preem. I tore myself out of Seven's grip, stumbling as I relocated my kneecaps, then rushed forward to greet the latest escapees from the nightmare. She looked and sounded ready to collapse, even though she was already being carried. Evelyn had her arms over Preem's shoulders, but her bone wand was clasped tight in both hands, fingers twisted into a precise configuration across the scrimshawed magic designs. She was deathly pale as if heaving with effort, sweat beading on her forehead, blinking hard in the direct sunlight. The modified 3D glasses perched on her nose did nothing to protect her eyes. Preem carried her effortlessly, hands beneath Evelyn's knees, Evelyn's walking stick wedged beneath her armpit. We're out. Evelyn called to me over Preem's shoulder, her voice a breaking croak. Are we actually out? You're out, you're out. I confirmed as I ran up to them. Evelyn nodded, then slumped against Preem's back, letting her bone wand hang from one hand. I felt a crackle of static across my clothes and a rush of warm air, the after effect of Evelyn's spell. Evie. I wanted to hug both of them, explain everything, and get Evelyn back on her feet, all at once. Instead, what I did was flap back and forth and whirl my tentacles like an octopus with too many. Enrichment activities, babbling at high speed about beacons and brain math, as Evelyn muttered a thank you and flopped one hand toward me. Heather, said Preem, interrupting my flow. Why yes. Preem locked eyes with me, milk-white and not quite as unreadable as always. Perhaps it was my imagination, but the doll demon was almost on edge. Safe? She asked, one bell-clear word ringing out. Of course it's bloody safe. Evelyn grumbled from her back, though she didn't let go of Preem's shoulders. The sun is out, Heather's here, so is all right, 7 shades of whatever is here too, that bodes well. Put me down, come on. I can stand. We are beyond the localized effect, said Sevens. I believe we are quite safe here, as long as nobody steps back into the house. Preem waited, staring at me. It's safe, I said, then added, I think. Preem waited. I'll make it safe, I said. Preem crouched, going down on one knee so Evelyn's feet could touch the ground. I fussed around trying to help, getting the walking stick into Evie's hand and steadying her with a tentacle as she found her balance, which seemed more difficult than usual. She was still pale and caked in cold sweat, hair plastered to her forehead. She struggled to get the bone wand away, poking out of her coat pocket. Yes, I'm fine, Evelyn hissed, half waving me off, half clinging to my hand for support. She held on hard, unwilling to let go. It hasn't got you too, has it? I asked. You're not having trouble walking. Evelyn shot me a dark frown. What hasn't got me too? Heather, a prosthetic leg can do a lot of things without support, but dismounting from a piggyback is not one of them. No matter how strong Preem is. Strong, Preem echoed, straightening up. She turned to stare upward at the trio of bubble servitors on the roof, which were craning down to examine us. Strong. But why a piggyback in the first place, then? I asked. Are you all right? Evelyn pursed her lips and gave me a dark look. I was doing magic, in case you didn't notice. Besides, you try wandering around a labyrinth for half an hour after the morning we've had. My hips are killing me. Oh. Oh, of course. Evie, I'm sorry. Sorry. It's all right, Heather, she grumbled, bumping against my side as if we were a pair of cats sharing our scent. Good doggos, Preem said, apparently talking to the bubble servitors up on the roof. No, Evelyn snapped. Bad dogs. All of them. All of this nonsense. Heather, what the hell is going on? Do you know? She nodded at Sevens. Does she know? What is all this? The nightmare of a god, said Sevens. Oh yes, that explains everything, Evelyn spat. Thank you. We do know what's going on, I said. Sort of, it's kind of disgusting, though. And complicated. Well, you better explain it then, because I assume everyone else is still stuck. Evelyn peered past me, taking in Nicole, who gave her a polite nod. But then she flinched and dipped her modified 3D glasses, to confirm that Marmite was indeed pneumosomatic life, invisible in the normal human spectrum. Her throat bobbed and her hand went clammy in mine. Heather. That's a servitor. It's lifting the car. There's actual matter interaction, that is a servitor. Not a spirit. Oh, that's Marmite, it's fine, he's not involved. I think. Well, of course he's involved, but not responsible. He's the thing we freed from Edward, back at Stack's house, remember? Stack's boy's father's house, yes. I cleared my throat. Evelyn gave me a look like I'd gone completely off my rocker. Marmite. The giant spider thing under Rain's car. You've named it Marmite? For now. Evelyn kept staring at me, so I started to blush. I needed a name, okay? I couldn't just keep calling him you. Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut and lifted the 3D glasses so she could pinch the bridge of her nose. She hissed a wordless sound between her teeth. If somebody doesn't tell me what's going on, I'm going to start belting people with my stick until words fall out. Marmite is a fine name, for a fine creature, said the yellow princess. Preem turned to look at Marmite too. Marmite looked back at her with his metal cone eyes. Good boy, said Preem, patting one thigh through her skirt. Come here. Evelyn was in desperate need of a sit-down, but going back inside the house to fetch a chair would rather defeat the point of escaping in the first place. Preem coaxed Marmite out from under Rain's car, crouching and speaking in soft musical tones, like he was a nervous dog. With Marmite out of the way, Evelyn sat sideways on the back seat, feet firmly on the tarmac, hands leaning on her walking stick while we filled her in on what had happened. At first she was very concerned with Marmite and had me explain, in detail, that he wasn't under Edward's control anymore. He was wild, that was for certain. Preem petting him seemed to go a long way to soothing Evelyn's worries. She listened patiently, recovering from her magical efforts, asking only a few questions. They're all high. Did I hear that right? They've gotten high. Lozzie, Jan, July, Kimberly. On weed? Most enjoyable, said Sevens. My apologies. Tenny and Whistle were excluded, I said. Lozzie was very clear about that. Bloody right, Evelyn grumbled. All right, fine, go on. This can't possibly get more absurd, not after the alpaca. She was wrong, of course. By the time I finished explaining the parasite and how I'd fished one out of Seven's throat, Evelyn had gone from a baseline level of frowning to looking like a woodcut of a priest at a witch burning. She stared at the smashed lump of gray meat on the ground, the dead parasite, one hand pressed to her own breastbone. "There's one of these things in Preem, too?" she asked. "And in me?" I swallowed hard, about to explain how we couldn't remove it right now, how I couldn't remove it right now. Sticking a tentacle down Seven's throat was one thing, she could regenerate her flesh with little more than a flicker of mask. But I couldn't risk serious harm to Evelyn. Even pushing a tentacle into her mouth would be too much of a risk. I knew deep down that I couldn't do it. "No," said Seven Shades of Certainty, before I could speak. Evelyn and I looked around at her. Nicole did too, leaning on the car next to us to save her legs. Sevens was watching Preem petting Marmite, an extremely bizarre sight even by our standards. The doll demon was squatting, skirt neatly tucked up over her knees, using one hand to stroke and scratch what passed for Marmite's head, just past his bank of swiveling, twitching, metallic cone eyes, which were currently scrunched up exactly like a dog getting some very satisfying pets. To Nicole, it must have looked like Preem was petting thin air. "No," I echoed. Sevens looked up. "Preem is clean. I do not know why." "Personal hygiene," Preem intoned. Evelyn snorted. "She doesn't process information like a human being does, not exactly. That may give her natural immunity. But then again, neither does Sevens here, or Hringe-Windla, obviously." "I am strong," said Preem. "Indeed," Evelyn sighed. "What about me?" "You are clean too," said Sevens. "I do not know why." "Oh," I sighed in relief. "Oh, that's good news. One less thing to deal with." Evelyn grumbled. "Too broken to be infested." "Evie." I tooted. "Don't say that about yourself." Evelyn waved me off, vaguely embarrassed. "I mean it literally. I've been possessed twice in the course of my life, remember? I might be shaped wrong. Inside. That's not a value judgment. You're shaped just right, Evie," I said. "And I don't care if it's a metaphor." Evelyn actually blushed slightly, huffing and grumbling, waving me away with an irritated flap of one hand. "We don't have time for all this. I'm exhausted already, after this morning. What a day for this to happen. How are we going to get everyone else out?" I asked. "My beacon thing only worked because you were already on the right path, so to speak. Nobody else has responded or turned up." Evelyn considered me for a moment, then looked to Sevens. "Do you think the others are in physical danger?" "Hard to say," Sevens replied. "I would wager not, considering Heather's experiences." Evelyn sighed. "Sevens is right. We need to deal with Hringe-Windla, shut this down at the source. Though I'd rather not." Sevens gave her a little nod of acknowledgement. "Are you sure?" I tried to keep the quiver out of my voice. "What about Rain, Twill, Jing? What if this is intentional? What if Edward is behind all this? What if we're being watched right now? What if Rain is in trouble, or if Edward's going for Lozzie back at home? There's children in there too and I." "Heather," Evelyn snapped, then grimaced and nodded an apology. "Sorry. Heather, I know. I'm trying to stay calm too. One thing at a time. We need to cut the phenomenon off at the source. Between myself, you, and Sevens, we stand a pretty good chance, I'd say." I blinked in surprise. "I'm not discounting us here, but Evie, this is an outsider, a god." "It's not a god," Evelyn said, with surprising patience. "Still. It's an outsider, exactly. And we're not going to fight him, we're going to talk." She grimaced at that word. "As Rain might say, we don't need the tanks for this." Nicole snorted a laugh. "Tanks?" I echoed. "Never mind. My point is, Heather, all we have to do is get you in front of him. Evie, you're putting too much faith in me. I don't even know what I'm doing. Deworming somebody with a tentacle is one thing, but this is an outsider we're talking about. I don't even know what he is, not really. Evelyn nodded, taking me seriously. Do you remember why Hringewindla was afraid of you, back when the cult? She paused, smiled awkwardly, and corrected herself. Back when the Brinkwood Church tried to convince us to come here. Because of hyperdimensional mathematics. Exactly. You need to reach inside him and deworm this dog for us. I'm pretty sure this will work. Good boy, said Preem. I boggled at Evie. How? On what basis? What if he doesn't want us to? What if he's confused? What if he's terrified of me? Heather, we don't have any other choice. I tilted my head at her when I realized. We don't know what we're doing, do we? Evelyn winced. I'm hoping it'll make sense when we get there. Nicole laughed again, throwing up her hands. It's the best shot we have, Evelyn raised her voice. And we need to stop this before it grows. She gestured at Sevens. Unless you have any other ideas? 7 shades of superficial modesty raised her chin. I could sacrifice everything I am becoming and wear a mask on the same scale as this ancient god thing. It may work. No, absolutely not, I said, then sighed heavily. I'll do it. I'm on his level already. I've had coffee with the king in yellow, I can do this. Well, okay, I rejected coffee from the king in yellow. Same principle. Nicole boggled at me like I'd grown a second head. I shrugged an apology. Should we call Lozzie? I asked. She might know how to talk to it. I would not take that risk with the little one, said Sevens. She may not be immune. I nodded, trying to fight down my nerves. Deworm a god. We won't need muscle for this, Evelyn said, with a tone of final planning. I know where the church is, as well. She pointed with her walking stick, off into the trees parallel to the road. There should be a path, signposted by the cult itself, if my grandmother's notes still hold up. If you say so. Heather, I don't like this either. Think of it as practice for the eye. To my massive surprise, Evelyn reached out and groped for my hand, finding it and squeezing hard. And you might have to do it alone, because I don't think I can hump it through 3 miles of woods. I squeezed her hand back. Magic is difficult, yes. I will carry you anywhere, Preem intoned. She stopped petting Marmite and stood up, still holding one of his segmented bone tentacles. Evelyn opened her mouth to argue, then sighed and nodded. Fine. Any taste of indignity would be worth the presence of a mage of your caliber, said Sevens. She didn't seem to be joking. But Evelyn shot her a frown all the same. Being carried by Preem is never undignified. Nicole cleared her throat and gestured at her legs. Sole pretender to the throne of bones, left without jester or attendant or court. Marmite is also strong, said Preem. And a good boy. The rest of us shared a worried look. Even Sevens didn't seem to understand that one. Preem. I said. Marmite is strong. Evelyn barked with sudden rueful laughter and put her face in one hand. She's telling you to ride the invisible spider, detective. That, or we leave you here, alone. Evelyn slipped the 3D glasses off her face and held them out to Nicole. Here, you'll need these, at least to how do they say it? Mount up, said Preem. Nicole looked absolutely horrified, though only for about 5 seconds. She gritted her teeth, shook herself, and accepted the glasses, slipping them over her eyes with a dubious grimace at Marmite. Time to get going, then, said Evelyn. Giddy up, Webb. Evelyn clambered out of the car with my help, while Nicole gingerly approached Marmite, still unsteady and weak. Sevens was watching the bubble servitors on the rooftop. Do you think they'll come with us? I asked as Evelyn settled her coat and got her bone wand tucked firmly under one arm. They can't reach their god right now, said Sevens, watching the numismatic froth creatures as they all stared back at her. He is lost in his nightmare. Well, grab an air horn, Evelyn said. Because we're going to wake him up. As we gathered ourselves to leave, I nodded at the smashed remains of the parasite on the ground, a smear of grey meat and thin, cracked carapace. Evie, do you think we should do anything with that? Burn it. When we come back. The Church of Hringwindla, the physical building which enshrined the presence of a living god, was not actually 3 miles walk away through dark and forbidding woods, trudging through rotting leaves and muddy wallows and scrambling over fallen tree trunks. In the end it was perhaps 1 mile north of Gearswin Farm, along a well-trodden and properly cleared path, lit with leaf-dappled sunlight, past some delightful bluebell patches. There was even a wooden signpost at a tiny crossroads, pointing to Gearswin, Lowdon, Brinkwood, and somewhere called Bedham, though the wood of the sign was old and slimy and covered in green lichen. Nothing ambushed us on the way there, not even a kink in the path, which surprised me more than I expected. After all, this was the secret core of an inhuman outsider cult, the last refuge and retreat of a crippled god from beyond our dimension. Shouldn't the path through these woods be warped and twisted beneath our feet, as if we approached the metaphysical weight of a black hole? Shouldn't it lead us into a confrontation with some nightmarish guardian? Shouldn't the woods behind us be vanishing in thick fog? I voiced as much to Evelyn, as Preem carried her along in a piggyback. That sort of thing is for cults that don't last, she said. Hringwindla's been around long enough to have some idea of human normality. I assume. The only sign we were approaching somewhere of supernatural significance was the total lack of spirit life, except for Marmite. I spotted a few furtive spirits further off in the woods, things that scuttled or scurried away before I could get a good look at them, but that was all. It was like an oceanic dead zone, deprived of oxygen or nutrients, a numismatic barren plain. Whatever was wrong with the place, it didn't affect Hringwindla's angels. A smattering of bubble servitors hung in the treetops, bobbing and rolling across the underside of the canopy. It's like their security cameras, I said. Good doggos, said Preem. Keep a bloody close eye on them, Evelyn said. We must have made quite the spectacle, traipsing through the woods. Evelyn was too exhausted and shaky for a mile's walk, so Preem carried her the whole way. At least she wasn't wearing her maid outfit right now. I still had blood smeared on my hoodie and an alien squid skull cradled in my tentacles. 7 shades of aristocratic poise looked totally out of place, more suited to a tea room than the mud and leaves, though she strode with unwavering confidence, using her umbrella as a walking stick. Nicole rode on Marmite's back with her eyes closed, gritting her teeth, her hands in a white knuckle grip on fur she couldn't see. I kept one of Marmite's tentacles wrapped with my own, in case he tried to wander off, but he was content to follow at my heels. I was very concerned about running into other people, walkers out for a stroll, that sort of thing, because untrained eyes would see Nicole floating, cross-legged in the air, about 2 feet off the ground. We'd already had enough absurdity for one day, between spooky alpacas and artificial night, not to mention the duel this morning. I could do without a screaming, panicking bystander. My tentacles kept twitching in anticipation, though I dared not acknowledge what I might do to keep us from being interrupted. But we didn't run into anybody. Not a soul. Even the birds were quiet, in this part of the woods. Trees thickened, canopy darkened, bubble servitors multiplied above us, and the path led us right to the ruins of Lowdon. Well, this is more like it, I said as we drew to a halt at the edge of what had once been a clearing. The ancient and forgotten village of Lowdon was nothing but a few stubs of stone and brick poking out of the leaf mulch. The tallest remnant of wall was no higher than my waist, covered in wet lichen and ivy, the mortar eaten away by time and weather. The vague outlines of half a dozen houses were spread out across a wide area that had probably been a true clearing 400 years ago. Now it was just more forest floor, with slightly smaller trees rooted where hearths and walls had once stood. One building was intact, in the center of the ruins, the church of Hringwindla looked exactly as I had imagined it might do, a long one-story structure made of that distinctive northern red brick, raised perhaps a couple of hundred years ago and fallen to ruin not long after. The roof was missing, leaving a half-complete steeple naked to the elements, without a bell or a fire or whatever was supposed to be up there. Tall, narrow windows contained neither glass nor shutters, long since shattered or rotted away. Weeds and moss grew in the cracks between the bricks. The front entrance was under the steeple, a low arch of brick, plain and unadorned. "What do you mean, this is more like it?" Evelyn asked, giving me a look. "And put me down now, thank you Preem. I should be on my feet from here." "I mean it looks like the center of an outsider cult," I replied, helping Evelyn down again. She found her feet and got her weight firmly on her walking stick. "It's all ruined and spooky." "Spooky," Preem agreed. "And well guarded," said Sevens, very softly, looking up at the trees. "None of this should be here," Evelyn said. "Think about what this is local history, somebody would have excavated it by now. Hringwindla has been keeping people away for centuries." Evelyn adjusted the 3D glasses on her eyes and followed Seven's gaze upward. "Ah! Hm." The woodland canopy above the ruined village was packed with bubble servitors, roiling and twisting and flowing over each other, like a mass of slugs suspended upside down. "That's a lot," I said. "There must be thousands of them," Evelyn murmured. She swallowed and found my hand, holding on tight. 10,000. "Walk with care," said Sevens. "We must be allowed to be here," I said. "They would make us leave otherwise, wouldn't they?" "Hringwindla is having a nightmare," Sevens repeated. "They are cut off." "Walk with care," Preem agreed. "Sevens," Evelyn said through gritted teeth. I could feel her quivering. "If they break and descend on us." "I will do what I can," said Sevens. Evelyn swallowed hard. "Then come on. And tread carefully." She gestured us ahead with her walking stick. "Can I please get off this giant spider now?" Nicole hissed, then opened her eyes and lit up with a grin. "Hey, words. I'm speaking words." Then she looked down and turned a little green. "Oh, I'm floating. Oh, I hate that, I really hate it." "Nikki." I sighed with relief. "Huh," Evelyn grunted. With a hand from Preem and a tentacle from me, we got Nicole off Marmite's back and onto her own feet once more. She wobbled a bit, but kept her balance well, straightening her coat and smoothing her hair back. "That was an experience I don't care to repeat," she said. Behind her, Marmite waggled two of his bony tentacles. "I think you've offended Marmite," I said. "Eh?" Nicole boggled at me. We're sorry, Marmite." She tried to look at him, but being unable to see him meant she just talked to a patch of ground. "Very smooth ride, very strong back. Just a bit weird, 'cause I can't see you and all. No offense meant." Marmite lowered his offended tentacles and crept over to my side. His eyes kept swiveling and twitching, trying to take in every corner of the ruined village and the church and the bubble servitors at the same time. He did not like it here, no more than we did. "This isn't necessarily a good sign, Detective," Evelyn said, sucking on her teeth. "I'm glad you're back with us, but this could mean we've stepped inside some kind of effect that renders the parasite useless, or has killed it." She looked to Sevens. "Any ideas?" Sevens shook her head. "You are the mage here. And you're the daughter of the king in yellow," Evelyn grumbled. "You can't tell us anything." "Please don't get into this now," I hissed. "I am barely a fingernail's width above you," Sevens replied. "Because I have chosen to be." Evelyn grunted. She looked at the church again. "We all did. Nothing else for it." "I'll take the lead," I said, mouth going dry. "I can feel ahead with my tentacles." "Preem, with her," said Evelyn. And both of you be careful, for pity's sake. Bubble servitors roiled and rolled far above our heads as we picked our way through the corpse of the village. Marmite clung to one of my tentacles with two of his own. Sevens gave Evelyn her arm for support. Nicole drew a highly illegal handheld pepper spray device from inside her pocket. She kept glancing at Sevens, but managed to keep her curiosity under control, for now. There was no invisible force field or magical trap blocking the front entrance to the church. Evelyn went over the whole thing with the 3D glasses and I stuck a tentacle beneath the arch to test. Nothing happened. How is a god inside this thing? Nicole hissed between her teeth. It's just a shell. Shells contain worlds, said Sevens. Both of you shut up and stop thinking, Evelyn said. Okay, maybe not you, godling. Webb, you stop thinking about it. Right you are, boss, said Nicole. We crept beneath the arch to join the weeds and mud and fallen bricks inside. The interior of the old church was in an even worse state of repair than the exterior, if indeed there was any distinction between in and out, without a roof and nothing in the windows. The woodland canopy filled the sky, bubbling with Fringewindla's angels. No wonder he didn't need human protection. An army waited to descend on anything that dared threaten his resting place. Nothing remained inside the church, not even the floor, just hard-packed mud. A few weeds straggled at the edges of the walls and some ancient bricks and roof tiles lay scattered about where pews and altar must have stood, once upon a time. Moss clung to the walls, along with some spots of healthy white fungal growth. No bird nests sat atop the old bricks, nor any remains of beehives or wasp nests. Not a single fly or mosquito buzzed past. The only sign that people had been here at all in the past 2 centuries were a pair of wooden beams braced against the ground, their top ends bolted into the bricks on opposite sides of the church, apparently helping to hold the walls up. I was bloody right, Nicole said. There's nothing in here. It's empty. The rest of us didn't reply. Marmite shuffled behind me, cone eyes peering around my legs. Wordlessly, Evelyn removed her modified 3D glasses and held them out to Nicole. Nicole went very still. Am I going to see a god if I put those on? Just look, Evelyn hissed. Nicole fumbled the glasses onto her face. Her jaw fell open when she saw what the rest of us were looking at. Where the altar had once stood, a white mound emerged from the mud, like a hill of chalk, about 10 or 12 feet in height and perhaps 7 or 8 feet across, flaring out like a natural hummock to meet the ground and disappear below the soil. But this structure could never be mistaken for a natural occurrence. It was ridged with a spiral pattern of impossible complexity, carved into the material itself, like shell or bone that had been worked over and over and over by an obsessive artist, carving the spirals within spirals, recurring downward and downward so one's eye seemed to be drawn into an infinite depth on a flat white surface. A dark opening yawned on one side of the white mound, curving down and away, large enough to admit a person. A single bubble servitor sat over the opening, leaning toward us like a mollusk performing a threat display. What am I looking at? Nicole whispered, as if the bubble angel might pounce if she spoke too loudly. I have no idea, Evelyn said. I could tell it took her considerable effort to say those words. This is numismatic, isn't it? I murmured. Otherwise Nikki would have seen it. Right. Sevens, Evelyn said, what are we looking at? I have no idea either, said Sevens. I am not familiar with Fringewindla, or where he came from, or his nature. Are we looking at a piece of him? Evelyn asked through her teeth. It's a shell, I said. A sinking feeling settled into the base of my stomach. It's the mouth of a shell. I looked down at the earth beneath my feet. The rest of it must be below ground, this is just the tip. Nicole laughed or tried to, a nervous flutter in her throat. Just the tip, she says. Ha. Shut up, detective, Evelyn snapped. You don't think we're meant to step in there, right? We're not meant to do anything here, Evelyn said. There isn't a guidebook for this. You think he's gonna come out of that opening? Nicole's voice was starting to quiver, her breath shaking. What's even gonna come out? What? Give me those. Evelyn snatched the 3D glasses off Nicole's face and put them back on herself. Cringe Windla. I called out loud, to the shell tip. I don't know what I expected. Evelyn grabbed my arm. Nicole flinched. Sevens raised her umbrella like a handgun. The bubble servitor on the shell tip craned toward us. Bad dog, said Preem. Nothing else happened. He will not give us an audience, said Sevens. He is dreaming, deep in his nightmares. The detective is correct. We may have to enter if we wish to wake him. Enter. The shell. Evelyn gritted her teeth. We don't even know what we're looking at. I shook my head, wetting my lips and trying to think. He is crippled, remember? What does that mean for an outsider, for a god? I wish we had Twill with us, Evelyn hissed. I patted her arm. My fingers were shaking a little too. She wouldn't be able to tell us much, I think. Didn't you say they always kept her away from all this? Because she frightened him too. A little like me. I don't care, Evelyn said. I still wish she was with us. Sevens lowered her umbrella again and took a step forward. I will see what I can see. Be careful. I said. Oh Sevens, please be careful. Evelyn gripped my arm with near panic as Sevens strode toward the spiral shell tip. Preem walked forward a little way too, to provide unspoken backup. Above us, the bubble servitors in the treetops rolled over each other like masses of giant slugs. The one atop the shell leaned forward, flaring and narrowing its front like the flat of a spade. It leaned directly toward Sevens. She stopped about 8 paces away, locking eyes with the angel. Bad dog, Preem repeated. Preem, what does that mean? I asked, trying to keep the anxiety out of my voice. Bad dog. Sevens peered into the mouth of the shell structure, craning her neck to see further inside without getting within range of the bubble servitor. It goes down, she said. Down and around. A spiral. I am not going in there, Nicole said. She swallowed loudly. I am not going in there. You can pay me any money you like, I am not going down there. No way. Just not. Then you can stay here, detective, Evelyn hissed, nodding upward at the trees and the thousands of bubble servitors above us. With them. Our small friend here may have something to say about that, said Sevens, watching the way the bubble servitor was leaning toward her. You think it doesn't want us to enter? I asked. Sevens didn't respond for a long moment, locked in silent communion with the creature. Then she sighed a tiny sigh. I may have to wear a different mask. Maybe I can communicate with it. Let it know we're not here to do any harm. I don't know how, though. Sevens turned to look back over her shoulder at me. Beloved, it is not a matter of communication, these little ones are not for speaking to. They are cut off and confused. Cringe Windla's angel rocked back suddenly, bunching and coiling like a dozen springs all bound together. Bubbles frothed and boiled then shot out like a rubber band. Sevens was caught in the act of turning her head, too slow when reduced to a mere human being. Preem darted forward to knock her out of the way, but the bubbles were faster, unhindered by the messy business of joints and limbs. Evelyn fumbled with her bone wand, far too late to respond in time. Marmite flared his tentacles and stood up on his legs, a threat display that went almost unnoticed. Nicole couldn't even see what was happening. Rationally, I knew that Sevens was not in any real danger. She was a god thing from outside. Even if the bubbles melted her face off, she could just switch masks. Couldn't she? Or would this count, would this be real? I had no way of knowing. What I did know is that 10,000 bubble servitors hung over our heads, and that an act of aggression against one might bring the whole mass down on us. Instinct did not care. A monster was going to smash into 7 shades of sunlight. No time to think, so I didn't. I hissed at the top of my lungs, braced all my tentacles against the ground, and flung myself like an angry squid. In retrospect, I probably should have used hyperdimensional mathematics. Instead of relying on the outsider-granted mind powers that I could literally weave at the speed of thought, I threw myself at a numismatic angel bud creature which looked like a collection of angry soap bubbles imitating the shape of a mutant slug, while we were inside the ruins of an ancient church which housed the entrance to the angel bud's god-high father nest, with thousands of the bubble creature's friends hanging in a mass above our heads, like an inverted glob of giant frog spawn. Clinging to the underside of the forest canopy, ready to fall on us like the world's most disgusting waterfall. This was not the smartest move I'd ever made. It wasn't the worst, but it was, in Evelyn's words, far from optimal. Brain math probably would have worked better, too. I was maybe 10 meters from the bubble servitor when it shot toward Sevens, well within range to smash it away with a jumbled physics-breaking flail of maths. And brain math worked at the speed of thought. There was no risk of the bubble servitor slamming into Sevens before I had time to lash out with the first tool I dragged out of the oily deep. It would be like braining an assailant with a spanner, not a perfect self-defense weapon, but it would have gotten the job done all the same. But hyperdimensional mathematics was higher-order thinking. Brain math required intention and planning, even if that planning happened in a split second of thought etched upon the frozen membrane between reality and the abyss. Planning. When a monster was about to engulf Seven's head and digest her like some giant pitcher plant of skinned muscle and toxic slime. Ape and Abyss were in agreement, hands joined, heads together. No plans. Defend the pack. Which is a long-winded way of justifying why I lost control. I hissed and screeched and sprang off the ground like a coiled spring, forgetting, of course, that Evelyn and I had our arms linked. I think I made her stumble, but luckily Nicole was there to catch her while I was busy playing Humboldt Squid. At least I didn't have to deal with the guilt of knocking poor Evie to the ground. I think I would have groveled at her feet for that. I spent less than half a second airborne, passing Preem and Sevens in a blur of whipping tentacles. Half a second was more than enough time to realize that I had made a mistake. Instinct had failed to take into account that I was not a 400-pound abyssal creature of fanged maw and razor-sharp spines, that I was not in fact what half my mind said I should be. I was neither armor-plated nor smeared with my own toxic mucus. If I had been, my friends might have had some choice words for me. I wasn't even ready for a fight, not as I had been against Uranju, with rapid alterations and additions to my core of true flesh. I was still 5'0" and weighed all of 105 pounds, numismatic tentacles or not. When I leapt, my mind said I should be sharp and graceful, like a steel spring, but I probably looked more like a chewed dog toy thrown onto a soggy trampoline. This was not the first time I had followed my abyssal instincts, these grafted-on drives and urges which felt so much more vibrant and real than the muted colors of swallowing my desires. But it was the first time they had led me to do something I was not even remotely prepared for. My body did the best it could. In that half-second, the bioreactor in my abdomen spun up like a turbine, pumping heat out into my belly, energy surging into limb and core, every muscle suddenly running hot. 5 of my 6 tentacles whipped forward to concentrate the impact on my target. The pale, smooth, rainbow-lit numismatic flesh erupted with hooks and barbs, toothed suckers, sharp scales, and biosteel blades. One tentacle curled tight into my side, holding on to my squid skull mask. No time to slip it on. The bubble servitor never touched Sevens, so at least I was a successful protector. I slammed into the thing in mid-air and brought it down, like a cricket ball hitting a water balloon. We hit the ground together in a rolling mass of tentacles and limbs and trailing bubbles, me hissing at the top of my lungs, the bubble servitor like a wet sack of rotten potatoes. Evelyn later described it as like watching a threshing machine dumped into a bowl of pudding. Pity it didn't feel that way. I would have preferred pudding. Touching the bubble servitor made my skin crawl, the thing felt exactly as I had imagined. Each translucent, iridescent bubble had the texture of raw meat, but wriggling and flexing, oily and warm. I didn't fight with any intent, just lashing out with feral response, pushing the thing away, ripping at it with hooked and barbed tentacles, slicing bubbles apart with my appendages, getting it away from us, away from me. Hissing and screeching warning noises, animalistic challenges to make this thing leave, I was completely beyond control. Pieces of the bubble servitor came away like ropes of rotten meat lashed off a carcass, clumps of bubbles tearing away from the central mass and trying to rejoin like water droplets under surface tension. The bubble servitor fought back, stabbing at me with makeshift pseudopods and clubbed masses of bubbles, but it was hard to tell how much was intentional response and how much was wild flailing. Perhaps the thing was simply flaring outward like a blob of slime beaten with a whisk. The creature was clumsy, inaccurate, without proper force or killing intention behind each blow. So, we were evenly matched, pretty much. It even whacked me a couple of times, ineffectual slaps that made me screech all the louder. The fight really a slap fight between two creatures that hadn't expected this probably lasted only 4 or 5 seconds, tentacles whipping the air, bubble monster whirling in confusion. Other voices shouted around us as I rolled on the hard-packed mud floor of the ancient church. Then something else stepped in and pulled the bubble servitor off me. For a split second, lying on my back in the depths of abyssal instinct and adrenaline haze, I thought it was Preem, resplendent in her maid uniform with ruffled skirts and frilled shoulders, black and white and perfectly starched, exerting demonic strength as only she knew how. But Preem wasn't wearing her maid uniform. It wasn't Preem. The bubble servitor splashed against the wall of the church, flung there by an engine of war. 8 feet of black, sharp-edged, armored plates, flaring outward in a cone, ridged with yellow membranes like toxic frills. A creature of curving carapace and many-jointed limbs, with hands like billhooks. A razor-sharp tail whipped past my face, a sensory bulb like a wobbling head turned back to check I was okay, poison stingers and fighting claws poised to repel Hringewindla's angel a second time. And yellow everywhere, in tiny tendrils rising between the plates of the figure's carapace, in the spore dust that shed from its back in a golden wave, in the soft downy fuzz down its front. Sevens. I said or tried to, unknotting my throat, raw from screeching like a wild cat. The bubble servitor decided that discretion was the better part of valor. Or perhaps it realized it shouldn't have messed with 7 shades of what the hell is that in the first place. As soon as it had reformed into a more coherent shape after splattering against the wall, it scooted upward, retreating from us like a spooked sea slug. Somebody whimpered in a desperate attempt not to scream. I think that was Nicole. But before I could say, Sevens, is that you? Hastur's daughter vanished quicker than the blink of an eye, replaced once again by the prim and proper princess mask. Her starched white blouse and yellow skirt were all rumpled and askew, exactly as if she'd just plunged into a bar fight and dragged me clear. She offered me her hand. I blinked at it, insensible and half-mute, still raging with adrenaline and waist-deep in abyssal instinct. And also still lying on my back like a confused tortoise. "We must move," said the princess. "Up, now." I took her hand. She pulled me to my feet as I found my voice. "S7s," I croaked, throat still raw. "What was?" "An old mask, from elsewhere," she said, quick and collected. "We must move, now." "That was beautiful," I mumbled. The crustacean machine was stark and clear in my mind, like I'd seen a real angel out here in the ruined church deep in the woods. Thank you, that was Bo. Kitten. 7 span her umbrella in one hand, pointing upward with the metal tip. I followed, then felt like a bucket of cold water had been dumped over my head. Suddenly I was very sober. The mass of bubble servitors up in the trees had not taken kindly to our act of self-defense. They had concentrated themselves in one central blob, directly over the shell of the old church, then begun to droop downward like a giant raindrop dangling from a leaf. The individual angels roiled and bubbled over each other, reminding me of a nature documentary about army ants. Strength in numbers, stick together, shoulder to shoulder to repel this strange and alien threat in their midst. Oh. Whoops. Whoops is right, Evelyn hissed through gritted teeth, unsteady on her feet as she peered upward through her modified 3D glasses. She had her bone wand out in one hand, but didn't seem to know what to do. God damn it, Heather. I'm sorry, It's not your fault, she added in a rush, grabbing at Preem's arm for support. Sevens is right, we need to move, right now. In or out, what are we doing? Very pretty, Preem intoned. But not the time to discuss outfits. Nikki, she's on our side. I blurted out. We have to move, right now. She's right. Just tell me you're not. Evelyn whipped the 3D glasses off her own face, stuck them over Nicole's eyes, and forcefully jerked her chin upward. Nicole stopped talking. Her jaw hung open. Right, Evelyn said through clenched teeth. She'd gone green around the gills. Her other arm was wrapped around Preem's elbow like a limpet. In or out, what do we do? Run, or go deeper? Quickly now. In. Nicole looked at her like she was mad. Into that shell? No way. It might be the only way to make contact with Fringewindla, I said, glancing up at the descending droplet of bubbles again. They were halfway to the church now, the dangling blob thickening like a droplet of honey about to fall. The sight made me hunch my shoulders and duck my head, skin aching to sprout armor plates and spikes, instinct telling me to flee as if before a predator I couldn't possibly understand. We need to move, we. Three things happened at the same time. Sevens pulled my hand, urging me toward the entrance of the chalk-white shell tip poking from the soil, where the church altar used to be. Nicole raised her voice in protest. Preem spoke too, a sudden sing-song of warning, bad doggos, interrupted by a yelp from Evelyn as Preem scooped her off her feet. And Marmite, plucky little Marmite who apparently didn't care one whit about the mask of Hastur's spawn, scurried past us all in a blur of terrified, scuttling limbs and threw himself into the open mouth of the shell. Run, shouted Sevens. We had deliberated for too long. Sevens all but lifted me off my feet as she dragged me into the opening of the spiral shell, shoving me deeper into the cave-like darkness, our feet ringing against the cold, smooth surface, so solid after the mud of the church. Sevens turned back to make sure the others were hurrying too, then she leaned out of the shell mouth and flicked her umbrella open, raising the lilac canopy as if to shelter them from a sudden downpour of rain. Preem bustled inside with Evelyn in her arms, half dragging her. Evelyn's eyes were screwed shut in terror, knuckles white on her walking stick. Detective. Sevens called, her composure cold with alarm. Nicole Webb was slow to find her feet or perhaps her courage. For one critical moment she fumbled with the 3D glasses on her face, unsure if she should join us or turn and run. But then she found her resolve, pushed the modified glasses against her eyes, and sprinted for the entrance, long coat flapping out behind her. Too late. The bubble servitors began to fall like hailstones the size of dogs. These were not natural spirit life, but hard pneumosomatic flesh, more akin to the Say family spiders than wild spirits. They hit the ground with real physical impact, slamming into the mud, sliding down the walls, filling the air with alien muscle and meat. Panting, wild-eyed behind the glasses, Nicole lurched to her feet and stumbled into the shell with the rest of us. Oh my foo! Deeper, now! Sevens commanded, snapping her umbrella shut and drawing it inside. No sooner had she voiced the warning than the entire mass of bubble servitors finally fell onto the church. It was like being buried by an avalanche. The creatures pummeled against the outside of the shell, the walls of the church, and the ground itself. They blotted out what little sunlight crept around the curve of the shell's interior structure. They started to flow into the mouth of the shell like loose rockfall at Sevens' heels. Sevens grabbed me again, but she needn't have bothered, I was already pulling myself deeper with my tentacles, running on pure animal instinct to avoid being engulfed by that wave of vile bubble flesh. Preem dragged Evelyn. Nicole followed close. Marmite scuttled sideways along the wall. We only stopped when the sound of giant hail ceased drumming all around us. 3 sets of shuddering breath filled the close darkness, myself, Evelyn, and Nicole. So little light penetrated this deep, past the mound of bubble servitors, that I could make out only the faintest outlines of everyone else. The walls of the shell were cool and smooth beneath my tentacles. My chest hurt with adrenaline and panic. Somebody swallowed on a dry throat. Evelyn. Is everybody intact? She asked. I think so, said Nicole. Present and correct, said Sevens from my other side. For now. Here, said Preem. A hand bumped against me, then held fast. Heather. Evelyn hissed my name. I'm okay, I said between panting breaths. I'm here, Evie, are you okay? You can say that again, Nicole agreed. Preem, here. Evelyn clacked her walking stick against the floor, against the material of the shell, then rummaged in her coat in the dark. Here, hold this, please. Yes, there you go. Just flick it. Let there be light, Preem said as she activated the flashlight function on Evelyn's mobile phone. Harsh light burst from her hand, held up high, casting ghostly illumination across the off-white walls of the shell's interior. Deep fingers of shadow danced across the curved floor, cast by our bodies. Nicole and I copied the idea. I found my mobile phone and switched the flashlight on as well, trying not to dazzle anybody. Nicole produced a tiny handheld torch from inside her coat, the exact sort of thing a competent private eye might carry. The torch shook in her grip and her face was coated in cold sweat. She pulled the modified 3D glasses off her face and knuckled at her eyes as we looked around. I can still see it, without the glasses, she said. Her voice was quivering. Bad sign. Because we're inside it, Evelyn muttered, taking the glasses from her with surprising gentleness. Stop trying to think, detective. But. Stop thinking. I will do the thinking for you. Nicole took a deep breath, but it stuck in her throat. She'd gone almost gray in the last few seconds, her face washed out by the light reflected from the walls of the shell. She made a fist, clenching too hard, about to break. Nikki. I said her name, but she was staring back up the way we'd came, at the pile of bubble servitors blocking the way back. Nikki. But then she noticed that Sevens had somehow caused the raised tip of her umbrella to glow with soft blue light. Like a magic wand. Nicole said, voice raw and shaking, but trying to sound plain old unimpressed. You're kidding, right? Screw that. Nicole snorted, forced and artificial, but she unclenched her fist and let go of her breath. All right. All right, I'm holding it together. I caught her eye. She gave me a jerky nod and an ironic smile. Nice tentacles, Morel. On display now, eh? I smiled back, trying not to show how terrified I felt. Evelyn and I shared a glance, silently agreeing not to voice the obvious conclusion. Being able to see the inside of the shell was one thing, we were standing in it, after all. But if my tentacles were visible, then wherever we were standing was more akin to outside than to our reality. Between 2 mobile phone flashlights, 1 handheld torch, and the twee fantasy glow of Seven's umbrella, we took stock of the inside of the shell. We were crammed together in a sort of narrow tunnel, perhaps 7 or 8 feet wide and 10 or 11 feet in height, with a gentle curve to every surface, making it more like an oblong tube, although the floor was relatively flat. The exterior of the shell had looked chalky, sun-bleached, and aged, but the inside was pearlescent white, the surface full of tiny veins like crystal that soaked up the light and reflected it back in shimmers and iridescent flutters. Spiral patterns curled across every inch of surface, white on white, looping back into themselves and leading downward, down the shallow incline into the dark, down the helix toward the heart of the shell. A pile of bubble servitors blocked the way back up, heaped on top of each other like the aftermath of a rock slide, blotting out the light. They weren't coming after us, but there was no way back through them. Evelyn stared at the mass of revolting creatures for a few moments, leaning on Preem's arm, then sighed and ran her hand over her face. "It'll be okay, Evie," I said. "We're not stuck. We're not." Air. Nicole swallowed hard. "How do we get back out? I would really like to know if there's a plan." "That was as much my fault as any other," said Sevens. "I did not practice self-restraint." "No, this is what we get for messing about." Evelyn snapped. "It was my fault," I said. "Evie, it was my fault," I threw myself at the bubble servitor. Evelyn gave me a sidelong look. I tried to look contrite, which wasn't hard because I was absolutely mortified. I'd brought the gathering of Hringewindla's angels down on our heads, and all I had to show for it was muddy clothes, dirt smeared all over my hoodie, and the ragged remains of an adrenaline high. I lost control, I blurted out. Back in the house earlier, when I found Rain, I didn't jump up to the window to join her. I feel so stupid I didn't, like I could have used my tentacles better, I should have followed the urge, so this time I gave in, I'm so. I opened my mouth and shut it again, unable to overcome Evelyn's glare. The way out?" Nicole prompted. "Please." Evelyn gestured at the pile of bubbles. "Remind you of anything, Heather? How do we end up in the same situation twice, I'm sorry. This is just like with Alexander's bloody castle. We're inside, no way back." "Oh," I sighed. "No, Evie, this is nothing like that time. It's not like we're trying to rescue anybody. Aren't we?" "First as tragedy, then as farce," said Sevens, a few paces further down the spiraling slope. Marmite clung to the wall next to her, his tentacles trailing out across the surface of the shell, exploring this strange cave. "I am glad to be present for the farce. And you are all glad I was not here for the tragedy." "Not a tragedy," said Preem. "Hey," Nicole said, sharper than before. "Are you all ignoring me? I can literally slip us all back out if I have to, Nikki," I said. "That's how we can escape. And rescuing Lozzie from the castle was not a tragedy, Sevens." Sevens nodded minutely, acknowledging my point. Nicole held her hand out to me. "All right, let's go then." "I'm ready, let's go." Evelyn snorted. Sevens raised her eyebrows. I swallowed and stared at Nicole's hand. "Going down," said Preem. Her bell-clear voice echoed in the confines of the shell, vanishing downward into the spiraling dark. Nicole studied our faces one by one. The light in her hand shook slightly. "You're kidding." I winced. "Well, this is what we wanted." "Wait here if you like," Evelyn grumbled. She turned to peer down the spiral. "Preem, I need a hand, I can hardly balance on this floor as it is." "Courage, detective," said Sevens. "You have more than you believe. You are no coward." Nicole grit her teeth and lowered her hand. She looked ready to either curl up in a ball and start sobbing, or shoot somebody dead. "Sorry," I murmured. "Cowards generally live longer," she said. "Just don't put me in the vanguard, all right?" Down went on forever, plunging into the dark beneath the world. Sevens led the way down the long spiral, umbrella held against her shoulder, sensible heels click-clacking against the calcium carbonate of Hringewindla's shell. If indeed it was calcium carbonate at all. What did outsiders use to make shells? Was this part of his natural form, or had he grown this shell after arriving on Earth, for protection and safety? If the shell was pneumosomatic, how had it come to be embedded so deeply in the ground? Clearly we had crossed some invisible threshold and stepped into a bubble of outside, like a bulb of pressurized water from the ocean depths preserved in a reverse bathysphere. I took Evelyn's advice and tried not to think too much about how this all worked. As Sevens had told me, outsiders have an odd relationship with notions of reality. Marmite scurried along the wall next to Sevens, happily keeping pace with her and probing the darkness with his long, bony, segmented tentacles. It was the first time I'd seen him uncoil them from around his body, using them like he had when he'd been Edward's remote-controlled puppet. The darkness and the close confines suited him well. Perhaps he felt safe here, at home in the dark. At least one of us did. I followed in Seven's wake, my own tentacles wide and waiting, in case something was about to rush out of the darkness. I kept my squid skull mask hugged against my belly, unwilling to hinder communication by seeking refuge inside the bone metal, for now. Evelyn and Preem followed behind. Evelyn struggled a little with the smooth, shallow ramp of the shell innards, her walking stick betraying her on the polished surface. Preem acted as her support, the mobile phone raised in her other hand like a lantern in the dark. Nicole brought up the rear, courage bolstered by purpose. For the first 5 or 10 minutes, we crept slowly downward without saying much, holding our collective breath. I didn't know about the others, but my mind was filled with images of Hringewindla, of what he might be like, some kind of giant mollusk at the core of this spiraling shell. At least he and I might have something in common. But after 10 minutes, the change became undeniable. "It's getting wider," Evelyn said, looking at the opposite wall. "Yeah," said Nicole. "I noticed that too. Weird, hey?" She toyed with her little can of pepper spray in one hand. "Well," I said, trying to sound bright. All I did was make myself flinch at the volume of my own voice echoing down the tunnel. "It is a shell, after all. I think they tend to get wider, on the inside. I think." "Stick to the right-hand wall," Evelyn said. "That's the exterior." The shell got wider and wider as we descended further down the helix. The slope of the floor got steeper too, tilting us downward. The left-hand wall drew further and further away, until it was barely visible even when we pointed the light directly outward. By the 20-minute mark, we walked at the edge of a black and echoing void. "It's okay, it's going to be all right," I said now and then. "I've been in worse places, much worse places. This is going to be okay." "Is this real?" Nicole hissed from the rear. Her voice echoed off into the dark beside us. "Is this another nightmare? This can't be real. We've been walking downward for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. How deep are we?" "Don't think about it," Evelyn said between her teeth. But Nicole couldn't stop. Her teeth were chattering. There was a video game with something like this. Horror game, I think. Played it back when I was a teenager. These stairs kept going down and down and down. Impossible. What was at the bottom? I asked. In the game? Hell. Sort of. Well, there's no such thing as hell, I said, trying to sound confident. Also a lie. There were many hells, outside. And at least there's no branches here, we can't get lost. Evelyn hissed. And don't you jinx us, Heather. So help me God, don't you jinx us with that. I shut my mouth and kept it that way. Just when the gradually steepening incline of the shell was becoming a problem for those of us without tentacles, Sevens found the stairs. "Oh, how unexpected," I said as I joined her. We briefly paused on the narrow, rough, rectangular stairs cut directly into the material of the shell. They followed the right-hand wall. Whoever had been here before had the same idea as us: don't wander off into the dark. "Stairs," Preem announced. "Hringewindla's home needs disabled access," said Preem. Nicole started laughing, a little too much, too loud, too shrill. Preem turned to look at her. "I am not joking," she added. Nicole ended her laugh with a cough. "Right. Yeah. Sorry." After almost half an hour of walking, half an hour of worrying about the others, about Rain and Zhang and Twill, half an hour of my gut clenched up like a fist, half an hour of being ready with adrenaline and barbed tentacles and brain math, half an hour of descent in the dark we stepped into the heart of Hringwindla's shell. Light filtered around the curve from up ahead as the helix leveled off and the stairs gave up. Diffuse, dark purple light washed over everything and made my eyes ache, as if a toxic sun hung veiled behind thick clouds. The light slowly revealed that we were walking huddled along one wall of a massive smooth tunnel. The left-hand wall was easily 300 feet away, and the ceiling climbed up and up and up. The tunnel ended like an estuary opening into the sea. We all stopped there, on the edge of the possible. Marmite came down from the wall and huddled behind my legs, his recent courage sputtering out. Sevens put out her light and touched the shell floor with her umbrella. Evelyn wet her lips and tried to speak, twice, but failed to find the words. Nicole's jaw hung open. I struggled not to coil my tentacles inward and cradle myself like a frightened child. A plane of bone curved away from us, so wide it seemed flat. The distant walls must have been several miles away, indistinct boundaries of mottled chalk and gray, curving back upward toward an unseen ceiling. The cavity in the heart of the shell was so large that it possessed weather. Thick dark clouds hung far up in the false sky, still as a dead ocean, lit from below by that strange dark purple glow. Towers of curled, spiked shell rose from the surface of the plane at regular intervals, in a spiral pattern, as if to provide anchors to something that had once filled the entire space. Some of them were cracked and broken, pieces of them missing, snapped off and lost. The surface of the shell itself was marked and scored here and there with meter after meter of jagged, black scorch mark, clearly ancient now, worn smooth and begun to blend in with the gray chalk of the shell. Some of the marks had depressions down their middle, as if dozens of giant claws had once scraped across this surface. The scorch marks and claw wounds all radiated from a hole, clearly visible far, far to our right, halfway up the distant wall. The hole opened on darkness. It must have been gigantic, tall as a skyscraper. But the crippling wound in Hringwindla's shell was dwarfed by what remained of the outsider god himself. Directly ahead of us, perhaps half a mile away, a dome bulged upward from the surface of the shell, a soap bubble the size of a football stadium. The shifting, semi-translucent veil poured out that strange purple light, like oil on water, reflecting the sun. Inside the membrane of swirling purple I could just make out a slow shifting motion, like a mass of gigantic pale snakes coiling over each other, a never-ending slither of scale against scale, soundless and vast, as celestial mechanics in the void of space. Angels Hringwindla's bubble servitors floated above the oily purple soap bubble in a distant halo. Thousands of them, docile and still, a court attending their crippled god. A few feet away from us, a short metal rod had been driven into the ground. A blue nylon rope was tied to the top of the rod, with the other end tied to another rod about 20 feet further on, and then another, leading toward Hringwindla. Guideposts, left here by human hands. Somebody whimpered. How? Nicole barely breathed the word. How does all this exist down here? We can, Evelyn kept trying to start a sentence. A single tear was running down Seven's cheek. I doubted that she was overcome by the alien strangeness of this place. Hers was some unknowable sympathetic melancholy. I've seen worse, I said with a sigh. Nicole boggled at me. Evelyn frowned in my direction. Sevens wiped her cheek and turned her attention to me instead. Preen kept staring at the big ball of giant snakes, but I don't think she was that bothered. Marmite gave no sign he'd understood, but he touched one of my tentacles to demand a handhold. You what? Nicole said. I shrugged. I have. I mean, it's weird, yes. Very weird. But I've genuinely seen much worse, outside. At random. As a little girl. Evelyn forced herself to take a deep breath, steadying herself by leaning heavily on Preem's support. Heather is right. She's seen much worse than this. This isn't actually that bad. We must keep this in perspective. I'm just used to it. It's not a big deal. I took a deep breath, oddly embarrassed by the way Nicole was looking at me. Then I shouldered ahead, taking the lead as I made for the first of the guideposts driven into the shell surface. "Come on, it's not that bad." Somehow, I managed to sound like I was telling the truth. This was very bad, in ways I wasn't sure I wanted to comprehend. We didn't even understand what we were looking at. I cursed my own lack of foresight. We should have had one of the Hoptons here with us to explain. I hadn't been aware of my expectations until they'd been dashed. I had imagined Hringwindla as some tentacle monster in a stone-walled church cellar, with a bloody altar at his feet, and a taste for riding along in human minds, something that could exist on Earth without breaking too many natural laws. I'd met gods face-to-face twice now, and I had to admit that Hringwindla was more akin to the Eye than to the King in Yellow. But I wasn't about to admit any of that in front of Nicole or Evelyn. Nikki was barely holding on. Evelyn was an unaltered human, however grumpy and brilliant she could be. Sevens and Preem and I may have been equipped for this encounter, but we had to protect those who were not. Then again, I wasn't sure if I was ready for this either. I grabbed the blue nylon rope with a tentacle, just for something to anchor myself, and then forced one foot in front of the other. The alternative was to give up. We'd come too far for that. To my deep and lasting relief, the others hurried to join me. My gamble had worked. Phone flashlights were switched off, Nikki's torch went out, and Marmite scurried up beside me, holding tight to one tentacle. "And you said you hadn't read any Lovecraft," Nicole hissed. "Old Howard was full of shit," Evelyn muttered. "Mostly. I think I preferred the spooky house," said Nicole. "Alpacas and all." Crossing the half-mile of open ground took about 10 minutes, flanked by those massive twisted pillars of shell, over the remains of scorch marks as wide as a bus. Our feet clacked and echoed across the smooth plain. The rubber tip of Evelyn's walking stick went squeak-squeak. Making our way toward the semi-transparent purple dome full of giant writhing tubes was not the most intimidating thing I'd ever done, but it was probably up there in the top 10. The landscape was not simply alien, it wasn't a landscape at all. The curvature of every surface, the blunt tapering barbs on the towers, the looming hole far off to our right, all of it was undeniably biological. Even the thick gray clouds were not true clouds, but some kind of clinging internal moisture. I tried not to think about the implications of that. "Why the safety rope?" Nicole asked after a minute or two. "I don't like that, not one bit." "Why do you think they need a safety rope?" Evelyn answered before I could think of how to soothe Nicole's worries. "Confusion, disorientation, brain fog," she said. "That sort of thing. Hringwindla gets into people's minds, detective. I would wager whatever acts of worship take place down here, sometimes they leave a worshipper unwell." "We won't," I said. "Excuse me?" Nicole sounded even more worried than before. I sighed at my own poor choice of words. "I mean, I'll slip us back out, once we're done here. We're not climbing back up the shell." Evelyn would struggle, for a start. "Bloody right," Evelyn grunted. Nicole snorted and shook her head. "For a second there I thought you meant we weren't going back at all." "It won't be like that," I said. "We're here to help him. Then we'll leave. That's all." "Help him is doing a lot of heavy lifting there," Nicole said. She nodded ahead, at the low purple dome like oil on water. "You gonna reach into that with a tentacle and pull out a parasite?" "She might," Evelyn answered for me. "Stop thinking about it, detective. Let Heather and I do the thinking." Nicole puffed out another sigh, but she stopped complaining. The Hringwindla dome revealed its true size as we drew closer. The shape wasn't really a dome at all, but actually a sphere, lying in a sort of socket in the landscape, slightly loose like a shrunken and withered eyeball, as if this core organ of his being had once been healthy and flush against the supporting tissues. About 100 meters from the lip of the socket was some identifiably human detritus, where the guideposts terminated. The shapes came into focus as we got nearer. A trio of modern tents were pitched next to a low stone building. Is that a church? Nicole asked. The real church, Evelyn said between gritted teeth. Inside his body. Thing must be ancient. But one of us was not watching Cringewindla at all. As we walked closer to the little human encampment, 7 shades of sunlight was gazing outward across the plain of dead calcium carbonate, her cool and collected features undeniably tainted with distant melancholy. 7s? I asked, as much to distract myself as to reassure her. Are you all right? For a long moment the yellow princess did not respond. I thought she hadn't heard me. Then she turned to gaze past me, the other way out across the inside of Cringewindla's shell. He must have been such a grand thing, she said. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Nicole went, eh? But I nodded, because I knew what 7s was talking about. I hadn't tried to put it into words, but it didn't take a marine biologist to understand. A fortress, 7s continued, voice soft and far away. Secure within his shell, bringing his home with him wherever he went. How many worlds did he visit? What sights has he seen? But now he cannot move. He cannot risk leaving, not with his protection ruined, or he might be devoured. He is stuck in the heart of his own shell, alive but immobile, marooned. The hell are you talking about? Nicole said. Big hole, said Preem. Eh? The hole in the wall, Nicky, I said. It's a drill hole. Nicole boggled at me, too. I saw her throat bob. She was very focused on this conversation, so as not to look up at the dome looming over us as we crept closer, like ants before a whale. Cringewindla has a shell, yes. I said. Like a marine mollusk. That hole in the wall over there, it's like the kind of hole made by a predator, the kind with a drill tongue, a rasping tongue. Like a starfish or a sea snail or something similar. That kind of predator pins the shell down, so they can drill a hole through, to get at the mollusk inside. Nicole stared at me, wide-eyed with dawning comprehension. Slowly, like a woman forcing herself to acknowledge a bleeding specter in the corner of her bedroom, she turned to gaze at the vast hole in the wall of the shell, the Leviathan scorch-and-claw marks across the shell's surface, and the barbed towers that looked like they were meant for anchoring flesh. Evelyn put her face in her hand. Her voice dripped with sarcasm. Thank you for that explanation, Heather. Detective, don't think about it. Looks like you won the fight, though, I said quickly, trying to cover for my mistake. Nicole had not wanted to know any of that. But he's been reduced. That's what they meant by crippled, I suppose. Sorry, I only know all this because I've watched so many marine life videos on YouTube. I trailed off and cleared my throat. This entire space was once filled with his flesh, said 7s. I winced. Evelyn rolled her eyes to the false sky. But Nicole just laughed, shaking her head. Giant sea creature gods, wounded and napping. And you said Lovecraft was full of shit. Reduced so far from his peak, said 7s. Stuck here, trapped in his own body. It is no wonder he rides along in the minds of his mortal friends. Evelyn snorted. Friends. An outsider with. She didn't quite manage to course-correct before the yellow princess gave her a sudden, sharp look. Evelyn cleared her throat. Present company accepted. You're different. 7 shades of not so smooth stopped walking, which was a problem because she was right next to me, with Evelyn and Preem behind us. Evelyn was forced to stop as well, arm in arm with Preem. Nicole halted too. Marmite paused at my side, confused by the sudden palpable tension. Am I? 7s asked Evelyn, ice-cold, umbrella resting point down. What about Preem? 7s, please, I whined, and felt like banging my head on the ground. Not now. Preem is a demon from the abyss, in a human form, that's different altogether, Evelyn said. Then she huffed. Look, I'm sorry, I apologize, I didn't mean to offend you. But you wear a human form. That makes it easier. I'm different because I am small, is that it? Because I'm not large? Because I choose to present in this form, rather than one like this? She gestured around us with a flicker of her fingers. Because I am not crippled. Evelyn's turn to sigh and give her a look. I'm crippled. Disabled, I said but gently. I wasn't actually correcting Evelyn's choice. But the word was there if she wanted it. I know what it's like, she said to Sevens. And I apologize. It's hard for a human being to have sympathy for something the size of a dozen whales. Yeah, cut us some slack, hey. Nicole said, wide-eyed and confused by the whole situation. She wasn't just left behind, she was practically on another planet. I was amazed she could keep up with this at all. And can we maybe not have this conversation while we're in the middle of a giant underground shell? Maybe. Please. We are about to speak with him, Sevens replied without looking away from Evelyn. Now is the perfect time to make sure we all understand what we are speaking to. I'm trying, Evelyn said through gritted teeth. She is trying, said Preem. Sevens waited another beat, then nodded, ever so slightly. I know you are, Madam Magician. I apologize for my fiery temper. Evelyn frowned at her, incredulous. Fiery temper. No apology necessary. I was in the wrong. Did I detect a hint of sarcasm in Seven's tone? This wasn't the time to investigate what was going on with her, so I filed that away for now, worried that all was not well with my yellow lover. We covered the final stretch of guideposts and blue rope, which led us to the little human encampment, about 100 meters away from the edge of the oily purple sphere. This close, the tube-like shapes below the surface were almost clear enough to see in full, a tantalizing suggestion of snake-like motion, ropes of clean white flesh sliding over each other in an endless dance, without head nor tail to demarcate end or beginning. The surface of the sphere itself was dizzying to watch, oily motion swirling in millions of tiny spirals, across a soap bubble larger than any object any of us had ever seen. Well, except for me. It wasn't larger than the eye. Purple light spilled from the surface of the great oily bubble. It made my skin feel oily too. My eyes and scalp both itched, as if I hadn't washed for weeks. As if by unspoken agreement, we all sheltered in the thin shadow cast by the strange old church. Who the hell do you think built this? Nicole asked. How? I don't even. Down here in the corpse of a god, said Sevens. People, Preem said. The Church of Hringwindla, the Brinkwood cult and the mad fools who had come before them had established a semi-permanent camp down here. The church building was truly ancient, made of grey stone blocks, roughly cut but expertly mortared. It contained nothing except a few low stone benches and a badly stained altar, the exact thing I had expected, though the stains looked ancient by now. The foundation stones were affixed directly to the shell's surface, though the building was short and squat, without a roof, and with one open end facing toward Hringwindla himself. What need of a roof when you were sheltered by your god? Anglo-Saxon, maybe? Evelyn said. Her jaw was clenched tight. She shot a look at me. Does our resident castle expert have an opinion? I shook my head, stunned by the age of the structure. It was untouched. No weather down here. I don't know. It's not a castle. The modern additions to the permanent encampment were far more practical. 3 sturdy tents were fixed to the ground with steel spikes, looking ready to endure an Arctic storm. A large camping stove was set up nearby, ringed by some cheap lawn chairs. Some kind of stout plastic cabin stood a little way from the tents. Nicole laughed when we realized it was a portalo, complete with the smell and everything. We kept low as we explored the tents, trying to keep out of the purple light as much as possible. The cult had food supplies here too, in a big chest next to the tents. Dried food, cereal bars, bottled water, and even a few MREs. Nicole peered at some of the bars, declared they were well within their best-by date, and then started eating while we poked around. The tents contained bedrolls, emergency changes of clothes, a first aid kit, all the things you might want while spending a season contemplating the divinity of a giant sea snail. The modern cult had even set up a small petrol-powered generator, currently switched off. Several full jerry cans sat next to it. Lines ran from the generator to a little heater, some flood lamps, and hidden away inside one of the tents the bulkiest and blockiest laptop I'd ever seen. "No prizes for guessing who spends all their time down here," Evelyn muttered. We exhausted the encampment quickly. There really wasn't much to see, unless we planned on spending the night here. I wasn't about to suggest that even as a joke. About 20 feet out from the back of the tents and the open end of the church, the cult had painted a line on the ground, in red. It stretched about 100 feet to the left and right. A second, closer line, was marked by rocks placed at regular intervals. Perhaps that line had been here for a much longer time. "Do not cross," Nicole suggested. We were sheltering between the tents and the church, like a clutch of tiny fishes afraid to venture out into the open water with the sleeping Leviathan. Purple light swirled and flickered over our hands and faces. I was starting to itch all over. Marmite wouldn't follow us, crouched by the tents. Smart money would say that indicates the minimum safe distance, yes, Evelyn said. But why the second line? Why the rocks? "Maybe he's gotten weaker, over the years," I said. "Sad," said Preem. Sevens nodded in agreement. "Why is he not reacting to anything?" Nicole asked. "Can it see us?" "He is having a nightmare," said Sevens. "Not dead, but dreaming." "Fair," said Sevens. "What now?" Evelyn asked between clenched teeth, staring up at Hringewindla. "If he's gone full hikikomori here, how do we wake him up?" I frowned at her. "Full what? I'm sorry." "Never mind." Evelyn shot me a look. "Any ideas?" There was nothing else for it. I didn't feel in any kind of fit state for a conversation with a god, let alone a wake-up call. My clothes were covered in dirt from rolling around on the floor of the church, I was hungry and tired and mentally exhausted, my skin itched all over and my eyes ached from the oily purple sunlight. But I took a deep breath, slipped my squid skull mask on over my face, and stepped out from beside the church. Hringewindla loomed like a cliff face rising from the land. "Don't worry," I told myself. "If the worst happens you can always slip him outside." Though that would probably kill him, wouldn't it? Evelyn hissed my name, then a plea to be careful. Preem said, "Heather knows what she is doing." Nicole stayed silent. Sevens followed at a distance, I could hear her shoes clicking behind me. I spread my tentacles wide and opened both my hands. Unarmed, without guile. "We come in peace." Hringewindla's halo of bubble servitors turned above me like moons around a gas giant. Behind the oily veil, giant white tubes shifted and slithered. I reached the red line, toes stopping inches from the stripe of paint. Behind my mask, my mouth was dry as a bone. My heart was hammering inside my chest. My legs shook. I was the adopted daughter of the Eye, but I was also very, very small. "Please wake up," I said out loud, then sighed when nothing happened, feeling like an idiot. "Wake up," I yelled, but shouting was not enough to rouse a god. "What do you need here, an alarm clock made of hyperdimensional mathematics?" "Possibly, kitten." I almost jumped out of my skin. Sevens had walked up right beside me. She was gazing up at Hringewindla's surface, both hands on her umbrella, tip planted on the ground before her, lit all down her front by that purple light. "Oh my goodness, Sevens, don't do that," I hissed, one hand over my pounding heart. "Alarm clock," she echoed. "Is that within your limits?" I don't know. Alarm clocks are a human concept. I don't think the Eye had anything to say about them, somehow. Do you have anything to say about them? She turned to look at me, cool and collected, even amid all this. "Maybe." Then try. Alarm clock, alarm clock, alarm clock, I muttered behind my mask, staring up at Hringe-Windla's core. Alarm clock. Sevens was asking me to forge something with mathematics that I had not been taught by the eye. She was asking me to create.